So 12,800 years ago was the end of our last glacial cycle. We do have that black layer. We have the extinction of the mega mammals. The people that we literally blamed for killing all these mega mammals, their culture also went extinct at the time. I think that the Carolina Bays formed during a time, it would be mid-Pleistocene in age, and that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And it gets a little messy because, we're talking about a really long time ago. It's when the last time we had a major pole reversal, like a pole shift. We have had minor ones, more recently, and right now our pole's kind of wandering around and things like that. But the last time there was like a reversal that's dated in like our C-core data and things like that was around 790,000 years ago. That's also when the Homo sapiens and Neanderthals split from a common ancestor. There was a split between genetics between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens at around 800,000 years ago. There was also like a 99% genetic bottleneck that took place at that time. So whatever, there had to have been something serious that happened then to cause species to differentiate. We're coming from two different worlds, really.
Yeah, being Navy and Air Force.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just mean like, the fringe science stuff versus you do a lot of like the veterans in the military and things like that. So, it should be a cool podcast to do. There's a lot of new stuff.
I always try to talk to guys like you though. Like we just talked to Jay Anderson the other day. It hasn't come out yet. I'm not sure. You're probably familiar with Jay. We've got Jeffrey Drum from Land of Kim lined up, and then I have a good buddy who is he was also a military police officer like I was, but he actually is a training instructor, drill instructor at Air Force Basic Training right now. But he is a huge paranormal investigator in Texas, and they have there's a paranormal channel now on TV you can get, but his team is on that channel now. Like he has a TV show. Yeah, it's pretty wild. And we've had them on a few times, and I do talk to a lot of vets. I like talking to mostly like talking to them because it's just nice to have a community. There's so many of us out there, and people enjoy hearing about it. But this is right here. This is my favorite subject. This alternative history, even though it's not really alternative in my opinion. I think we're just finally talking about things that are outside the narrative because there's been so much gatekeeping going on. And thanks to alternative media for giving that a space and then letting other people absorb that material.
Yeah, I mean, even like Pierce Morgan is putting stuff out recently. He's been pulling in, a lot of guys, like the whole Egyptian timeline and all that. It's kind of neat.
It is cool to see. There's another. He's still kind of, I guess you could say, like up and coming. Although he was just on Joe Rogan not that long ago.
Luke.
Luke. Yes.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Luke and I are friends. Yeah.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I was just going to say that he's been on our show a couple times, and it's cool to see his rise because I remember finding him randomly on Instagram, and his account had like something like 7,000 followers, but like what he was doing was awesome. And as a millennial, right, and an Indiana Jones fan growing up my whole life, his whole shtick, a little bit there was the Indiana Jones thing. I was an instant follow, and was really excited that he agreed to come on and talk because like man, that's still the show is really nothing, we're not a Julian Dory or a Danny Jones by any means, but that he agreed to come on and agreed to come on multiple times. But Luke is awesome. I think what he's doing, heading off into the jungle, it is literally, I say this all the time and he kind of laughs when I say it, but it is very Indiana Jones.
Yeah. He would text us from like the top of a pyramid in Mexico somewhere. It's like, what are you doing, dude?
Right.
We actually both we kind of both got our like public break through the Cosmic Summit with George Howard. It was an interesting story too because neither one of us were like part of the original lineup. And the very first Cosmic Summit in 23, that was Graham Hancock was supposed to be there, and he backed out. And when he backed out, Jimmy Corsetti backed out, and became kind of like an ordeal. But I already told George if he needed me, I was back up. George is the promoter of it, and he's kind of running the whole thing. And I told him ahead of time, I was like, hey, if you want to talk about Carolina Bays, I've got a presentation already ready to go. And I was planning to go anyways. I had already bought like not the ticket, but he was going to give me the ticket, but I bought my room. He called me. He was like, hey, dude, I think I might need you to come and present. because not only him, it was also Matthew Lohmeyer. Matthew Lohmeyer was supposed to go. He ended up not going for another reason. He ended up getting another job, but and he's the Space Force guy.
Yeah, I know you're talking about. Yeah.
So that I kind of took his spot. Johanna James mentioned Luke, and so he contacted Luke, and Luke was like, "Yeah, I'll come." And you're right. He had that Indiana Jones shit going, and
he does.
And I was like, "Dude, roll with it, man. People are loving that right now."
They do.
Yep. And he's kind of phased out of it now, but I'm like, man, that was that. That was the hook. You got to get people in.
I agree. Even if it is Indiana Jones, that he talks a lot about Percy Fawcett, and just that look in general has that explorer, anthropologist, archaeologist look. It's what you expect. I think this is one of those times where life is imitating art so much because Indiana Jones has given people this expectation of what people like Luke and the others who do what he does look like, and so it's just like, it's cool, it's shticky in a way, but at the same time, it's kind of what you're expecting.
Well, and even the archaeologists are like, oh, we're not all Indiana Jones, but then you look at them, they all have the fedora, they're all,
right.
They all wish they could be Indiana Jones.
For real, yeah.
And really, Luke is doing more Indiana Jones shit than they are, so it's pretty awesome. And he's not, and he's not like trying to bluff anybody either. He's like, I would rather be, what did he call it? Like a, education, but for like doing YouTube stuff. He's like, this is more fun to me than writing research papers and stuff like that. And
it's more approachable too. You're going to reach, I think Luke actually has a goal, right?
Yeah.
It's not that he's doing it because he knows somebody's going to click and he's just going to monetize his content, right? I think he cares very much about, I shouldn't say I think, I know. He cares very much about getting his message out there and then exposing all of this history that exists in the jungles like the Peten and the Amazon and showing, hey, look, there was so much that was suppressed because of the European influence on this continent, and there is all of this architecture that exists through LIDAR. We've been able to see these scans, and he actually he's not just talking about it from his house either. He's going, like you said, out in the jungle and exploring and showing these things. That is going to reach people, and people are going to learn way more than if he published a paper. No one's going to really go and say, "Oh man, that's a 72-page paper on a lost civilization in the jungle. I don't have time to read that," but they got time to go watch a 20-minute video, even if they break it up.
Right. Yeah, I actually got a little worried. He was, I guess, over in Alexandria and Greece, and he was going to do a study program over there in Greece. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if that's the direction you need to be going, bud. Head back down to the South America. That's where it's needed the most right now. And he did. He kind of changed his mind about that. So I was like, thank goodness.
Yeah, that's
back on track.
For sure, that's an area of history that just doesn't have the attention. And then from my perspective, the people going and spending the time doing it, and for good reasons, right? It's a very tenuous environment to get into. It's very dangerous. You have to be a special kind of person to be willing to put up with that stuff. A young man like Luke is somebody who definitely fits that mold, and I love seeing it, and I hope he inspires other people to go do it, because could you imagine 10 Lukes who respect the jungle and respect the history to not go and just steal or destroy it, crawling around the jungle there and teaching us about all of this history, and finally getting some of these LIDAR scans. And the more that happens too, the cheaper it will become, because I know it's a very expensive thing to do. So I applaud him. I think what he's doing is amazing. I hope that he inspires a generation of people that'll go and do that kind of thing.
I agree, for sure. Yep.
So how did you get involved in doing what you're doing? You said you were a Navy brat?
No, yeah, Navy brat. I was not in the military myself. My dad was. He actually started off as on fast attack subs. He was a sonarman.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So he did sonar, and and that was ramping right into the Cold War. So there's stuff he still can't talk about, and but living and growing up in that community down here, going onto the base and I worked at this, lifeguarding at the swimming pool on the base that we have here. And, that's really the part of being a Navy brat is moving a lot. When I was little, we moved like 3 or 4 times, like cross country. And And it's interesting because I didn't think about it at the time. It was kind of sucky at the time, you know, but thinking back now, I think that's where I got a lot of my, you know, just insight and excitement about like geology and geography and seeing new things and you know, going to the Grand Canyon when I was like 8, you know, it's like, hey, not a lot of people get a chance to do stuff like that. And it really, it's, you know, makes an impression. So,
right.
You know, and then later on, it's, you know, you start getting into doing geology stuff and it's explaining the things that you saw when you were little. And it's like, okay, I'm getting it now. So that was fun. Yep.
For sure. My dad was in the Air Force, so I was in, and then I moved around a bunch too, you know, and I agree with you. I think that too, the community that you find on base, one of the focal points is the library. There's always things going on, you know, and they're always looking for like something for the kids to do, you know, your mom or whomever, you know, your dad or whoever's deployed or at work. And so you go to these places where they're going to be, and then the library sort of naturally has that effect on you to want to learn more. That's kind of where I think love for history came from too, is my mom just taking me to the base library and doing things like that. But I agree, man, moving around like that too will give you an appreciation for all that there is, and it kind of enhances that natural curiosity a kid has to want and learn more. But you said you went to the Grand Canyon when you were 8. I recently went like last year for my brother's wedding. He got married in Arizona, and it is surreal. Like, I try to tell people, it's not just one canyon. It is like Grand Canyons inside a Grand Canyon. It's almost unfathomable. The pictures don't do it justice, just how big it really is.
Right. And I remember asking my dad, you know, I was like, hey, you know, how did this happen? How did this form? And he was trying to explain to an 8-year-old how water formed the Grand Canyon. Right. And my 8-year-old brain, I looked down, I saw like some wet leaves on the ground. I was like, dang, that just happened, you know?
Right. Exactly.
And you know, later on finding out that no, it really did take a long time. There's a lot of uplift that takes place there and erosion, you know, knocking it down, but still fascinating, you know, and having those thoughts when I was 8 years old, that kind of helps, you know, it helps.
It's incredible.
Reach fringe ideas and then kind of listen to what other people have to say too. So it's kind of neat. Yeah.
Geology was the field that you chose to go into. At what point did you?
No, I'm a secondary science educator. Okay. I actually when I first went to school, I wanted to get into biology, kind of marine biology. We always lived on the coast and, you know, always spent time out in the water, out on the boat and things like that. And so, I was really kind of interested in marine biology as a research study, cool. You know, but my freshman year was just awful. I should have joined the military, to be honest with you, 100%.
Oh man.
I was one of those that needed that, you know, I needed that extra, you know, I guess, drive that the military will give you and focus.
Fair enough.
I needed it. And I didn't do it. And, you know, I went straight to college, and that freshman year it was abysmal, man. It was terrible. Right. And I pretty much either join the military. Actually, I met my wife didn't meet her, but we started dating during that year. And it was like, you know, I can either join the military or you know, straighten this up and head over there. And so I did. I kind of focused my career goals into something more manageable. I started focusing on, you know, education as a background. Started taking courses in that. But in science education, you have to take all kinds of other science courses. It's a broad field degree, and so you have to take the chemistry classes. You have to take the physical sciences, and my area focus was Earth and Space Science. So I had to take all of those classes too. But at the same time, I really needed to boost my GPA because my GPA was so bad from that first year. Sure. And I really liked the geology. I took a geology class. In fact, I took the first geology class that same year that I just completely bombed. And I was like, out of all the classes I took, I was like, I kind of like this. This is a lot of fun. And so once I finally got my GPA up high enough to enroll into another college, because they wouldn't even take me at the original one. They were like, no, you're not coming back here. No, you had your chance here, boy.
We've seen this.
Yep. So I got my GPA up high enough. I went to another school in Valdosta State University, which is in South Georgia, and I pretty much took like every geology class that they offered. You know, geology, environmental geography. In fact, I took so many of those classes that not only did I end up with the secondary science education degree with the focus of Earth and Space Science, but I also ended up with like 2 additional minors, one in geology and one in environmental geography. So that means I took all the courses that were required of me, and then 2 more minors worth of college classes just to yeah, and I had to get that GPA up. So, and I did well in those classes.
That's great.
Yeah. So I ended up with those. I did get a job, started teaching, all that kind of stuff. One of the interesting things about being at Valdosta State, though, was one of the field trips we took was to a Carolina Bay, which is the topic of our discussion tonight. It's a place called Grand Bay, and it's about maybe 20 minutes away from the main central part of Valdosta, and it's a wildlife management area, so there's nobody out there. There's a long boardwalk that goes through the middle of the swamp, and then there's like a 100-foot tower that you can climb up to the top of and just see the whole thing. We went on a field trip there, and through one of the geology classes that I was taking, and I remember asking, because from where you were, your perspective, it was almost like a complete circle. Like you could just see all the way around. Okay. It was just swamp everywhere. And I was like, how did this form? And where we were in very south, I mean, this is extreme South Georgia. I mean, it's the county that borders Florida. So if you go any farther south, you're in Florida. Yeah. And they have a lot of sinkholes there. It's a karst topography. It's limestone. And I was like, is this like a really large ancient, sinkhole that filled back up, and now that's why it's so circular and swampy. Yeah. Which makes sense, And then the instructor was like, no, this is actually it's a Carolina Bay. They formed differently, and he said it's actually kind of a mystery how they formed. And being 20 something, 21, 22, whatever it was, you start talking about mysteries, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah. I'm interested. Tell me more. Yeah, and so, anyways, he was telling me that the dominant hypothesis for how these things were formed is that during the Ice Age we had really strong winds coming off of the glaciers, and that it was a pond, and that this pond was swirling around and creating this circular shape. And he did tell me that it wasn't a circle, that it was an ellipse, which is more oval shaped, and that there were a bunch of them in South Georgia all the way into North Carolina, South Carolina and North Carolina. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's pretty crazy. And I actually got online, and back then, this is even before we had Google or anything like that. It was, Ask Jeeves or whatever, and try to find information. And it popped up this website on Carolina Bays that actually was hosted by George Howard. He actually just found it and republished that website from the 90s, 2000s. Yeah, it's on his blog, The Cosmic Tusk. But anyway, so yeah, he had all this information, and he linked it to this impact thing, and I was like, well, that's crazy. That sounds really cool. And the more I looked at it, because that's when you first look at them, even back then when I was looking at them before we had, LIDAR or anything like that, it was just aerial photos, and these were like aerial photos from airplanes. They weren't even like satellite photos yet. Google Earth wasn't a thing, and so we were pulling up. There's a database that you can go onto, and you can pull up airplane pictures, and so I was looking at them, and I was like, man, there's no way that wind and water could create these things. There's just so many of them. They're all so similar.
They're very perfect looking too.
Yeah, very, very perfect looking. And, so that really kind of made me kind of lean towards the impact hypothesis for how these things formed. And then I kind of forgot about it. I was working and, starting a family, and it kind of just wasn't, it was in the back of my mind, but not something I was focused on. Throughout the process, I started teaching at the school that I'm at now. And I wanted to start a geology dual enrollment course at the high school that I work at. Dual enrollment is when high school students can take a college credit, and they either go to a college to take it, or we can host it at our school, and they would just, like a regular class, show up every day, and they would get the college credit at the end of it. In order for me to do that, I had to have so many graduate hours in a certain field. And so I went ahead and enrolled and got my first master's degree I got back in like 2007 in education. The second one, though, was in it was in geoscience. And again, the main purpose was so that I can teach these college level classes to high school kids. And I went ahead and got that in 2015. And that's also the same year that Randall Carlson first came out on the Joe Rogan show. And, he was talking about some crazy stuff, and I actually had a friend of mine who's a flat earther my flat earth friend Jamie, he sent me that link in 2015 because he was always arguing with me about flat earth, and I literally have like a master's in geoscience. Right. I'm like, Jamie, oh my God, dude,
bro,
yeah. And anyway, so he was sending to me because he's also a big creationist, and he's like, this guy's talking about global floods. You need to listen to this. And I was like, all right, buddy, I'll listen to it. And when I was listening to it, though, Randall was talking about things that I was learning about in these master's level geology classes, and things like isostatic rebound and the glacial mega floods at the end of the ice age. And then I was like, this guy's making a lot of sense, and that was really when I started kind of changing my own paradigm, changing my own perspective on things, because as a secondary science educator, that's my job, is to take complex science topics and break them down for 17 and 18-year-olds to understand.
Sure.
And if you start going too far out on the limb one way or the other, you're going to lose them, and you can lose your job, because that's what you're being paid to do, is to teach kids science. Sure. But yeah, so now I have this master's degree, and I'm seeing this stuff, and I was like, I think he may have even brought up Carolina Bays in that interview. I can't remember if he did, but it may have been that 2015 that he brought up Carolina Bays, because that's actually what got Randall involved in a lot of all this stuff. Is
it really?
His interest in the Carolina Bays back in the 70s, and that was when we had like really limited research on Carolina Bays.
Sure.
And he saw them and was like, impacts, of course. What else could they be?
Well, you said isostatic rebound. What is isostatic rebound?
Oh, isostatic rebound. It plays a part in this story a little bit as well too. But during the peak of our last glaciation, and it's kind of important that we make that the ice age itself is actually it's a 3 million year time span. Okay. So the Pleistocene is pretty much the ice age, and we go in and out of glaciations. A lot of times when we're just talking, 101 or whatever, people will use the terms ice age as meaning, the last time we had ice over Canada. But technically we're still in an ice age today. And so, we just kind of go in and out of these glaciation cycles, and we'll look at some of that here in a little bit. But whenever there's like 2 miles on top of Canada, 2 miles of ice on top of Canada, there's a lot of weight. I mean, one gallon of water weighs like 8 pounds or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you freeze all that, and you got 2 miles of ice on top of a continent. There's going to be a lot of weight, and it's pushing it down.
Compression. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pushing it down. And so during the ice age, during our last glaciation, there was a ton of weight sitting on top of North America. And relatively suddenly, it was all released. It was all melted and drained back into the oceans. And so not only did we see like sea level rise with all of that water rushing into the oceans, but there was a tremendous amount of weight lifted off of the continent. So North America, Canada started to rise, and that's what isostatic rebound is, the adjustments from all of that ice being released or added to it at one time. It kind of plays into the whole Atlantis story.
Does it really? How so?
Yeah, with Atlantis being possibly in the Azores. Mm-hmm. And again, I actually have a whole lesson on this, even for my son, because kids love Atlantis. You bring up Atlantis, and they're like, "Oh, I'm in. Let's listen." Yeah, and so you can really use it to kind of drive in some of those scientific topics. But during the ice age, with all that weight on top of Canada pushing it down, the best place for that release to be pushed up is where the plates meet. And we actually have 3 plates meet at the Azores Plateau. We have the North American plate, we have the Eurasian plate, and we have the African plate, all right there at the Azores, which is the island chain in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And so during the Ice Age, that was being pushed down in North America, the other area was probably even pushed up. If you had a sudden release of that water back into the Atlantic and the adjustments happened quickly, you could have that area rising up a little bit more while this one sinks down a little bit more. And so, that's actually, I think, what Randall was talking about in that 2015 paper, or not paper, but interview with
the podcast.
Yeah, podcast with Joe Rogan.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's when I was like, that makes a lot of sense, and that actually adds a lot of credibility to Atlantis actually being a place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and there being a much larger landmass there. And like I said, I have a whole video on the geology behind the lost city or continent of Atlantis being in the Atlantis.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I'm a little biased because my grandmother, her family was from the Azores. And so, I'm like, of course that's where Atlantis is.
Yeah, I'm Atlantean.
Yeah, Grandma's been telling me that for years.
Right.
But we actually went to visit there 2 years ago. Or I guess it's 3 years ago now. And we spent 2 weeks in the Azores, and spent, it was more of a family cultural, experience trip. But it was a lot of fun. Beautiful, beautiful place.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an Air Force installation,
Yep.
a Navy one there as well. I've always wanted to go. I didn't get the opportunity to go, but I've seen plenty of pictures. It looks absolutely gorgeous. There's geological evidence, obviously, of the rapid warming up that you guys are talking about so much with like the Younger Dryas impact theory. Would there be the same geological evidence on display in the Azores from something like that if there was indeed a rapid rising or falling off? Kind of
there are actually there are a couple papers out there that do investigate that. I haven't looked into them all, but I do know that there are geologically there are what do they call those, the tabletop mountains, the sea mounts that are flat. Guyots, I think that's what they're called.
Okay.
But the only way that can happen is if they're exposed to the air and they were eroded flat. It's basically the top of a volcano that has been eroded flat. We see this like atolls are happening. It's happening right now where they sink below the waves are eroding at them, and then you're left with a seamount that has a flat top.
Right.
There are some of those in the Azores, and so that they were exposed at some time. They were above the ocean being eroded away. They also find, I think it's like beach sand, like actual, not what we would expect to find on the bottom of the ocean, like that kind of fine detritus type of sediment. But it's like Aeolian beach sand, like from the beach, much lower than it should be. Yeah, much lower than it should be. Now, as far as finding, actual pyramids and buildings and things like that, I think it's just speculation. But
sure.
Yeah. The thing too, just that whole story, because we did at the end of the last ice age or the end of the last glaciation. I'm just going to keep saying ice age because I know that's what we all know.
It's easy. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the end of our last ice age, sea levels did rise 400 feet. There was enough water from the North American ice sheets that had melted into the oceans to raise sea levels 400 feet. And why that's important is because, even just scuba diving, if you were to go look for something under the ocean, like the deepest you can go safely is like 100 feet. You try going any deeper than that, and you risk serious damage and death. Right. And so we have not investigated anything much lower than 100 feet, and it's at least a 400-foot sea level rise since the peak of our last ice age. That's where we're going to find like evidence of advanced. I wouldn't even say advanced civilization, but just evidence of people, civilization. Mm-hmm. Yeah, towns and
absolutely.
Us basically. Our ancestors. We're going to find their civilization 400 feet under the seas, and about where I live, it's about 100 miles further away from the coast. So we have our current beach forming today, but 400 feet lower and about 100 miles away is where the beach would have been during the peak of the ice age. And people were here. Humans were here in North America at that time doing our thing. And that's where most of the evidence is going to be found is out there in the bottom of the ocean, about 400 feet down. Now, the reason why that isostatic rebound is important is because the Azores would be much lower than that too, right? Mm-hmm. So you had 400 feet of regular sea level rise, but then that area probably did sink, during the end of the last ice age. So, yeah.
With a shift like that, there would be a lot of sediment, wouldn't there? Like sliding off and like changing the turbidity of the water around there. Is that something that you guys like track, or you can track like the turbidity rates and going back in time, or is it the ocean is just too free flowing to track anything like that to say like here's evidence that it was the turbidity of the water was a lot more because there was so much sedimentary slide off because of, rapid melting or anything like that. Is that something that you guys track and can use as evidence?
Well, I don't, as far as you guys, the Comet Research Group, are you familiar with them? Yeah, so the
a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so the Comet Research Group is a group of scientists that are, they're the ones really digging in and finding evidence for the Younger Dryas impact. Basically saying that there was some form of impact event that took place around 12,800 years ago. That really is what caused the Younger Dryas to happen. The Younger Dryas, first of all, that's a real, nobody debates that happened. Like the Younger Dryas there was an influx of fresh water from North America that suddenly, so suddenly that it actually blocked the Gulf Stream. And, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Day After Tomorrow, but it was kind of a scenario like that where instead of it being, I think it was an ice shelf that broke off or something and blocked but it was a sudden influx of fresh water from the ice sheet that disrupted the ocean circulation patterns. And that's what caused the temperatures to go back into glacial ice age, temperatures for another 1,200 years. That happened. And it was just a cold, dank place in North America for literally 1,200 years. Very little sunlight, lots of just algal growth and just a damp, gross place for 1,200 years. And then we came back out of it, around 11,600 years ago. And then all of a sudden at like 10,000 years, if you read the history books, all of a sudden humans were like, oh, we could start growing, planting seeds around our huts, and we could start agriculture and raising goats. And then all of a sudden, we're civilized. Again, I personally think that we were doing those things before all of this other stuff happened, and it's going to be down at the bottom of the ocean, 400 feet. So
sure.
Yeah.
Do you ascribe to the thought that there were survivors of the Younger Dryas impact, and they scattered in an effort to survive, and there's all this tidbits of information and knowledge that went with them, and that's why there is such a break in this idea of a chronological historical timeline?
I think that this would have been that the event itself would have been pretty traumatic. Obviously we have rising seas, people are relocating, and it's not like they rose overnight either. It would have been a couple hundred years of gradual, not really gradual, but much. I think it's slower than what people think it was. But you can imagine, I live on the coast, and I've been here for 20 something years, but that wouldn't have been possible then, with the sea levels rising the way they were. We would have always been in constant, what's the word? I don't want to say migratory, but we were always moving.
Nomadic.
Nomadic. Thank you. That's the word.
Yeah, you're good.
I think we would, and that's what we see. And we pretty much, we don't give ourselves enough credit. And we're like, yeah, we were all cavemen. We were all nomadic. We were all just moving around. It's like, I think we had to be that way. All of a sudden we don't have access to the large game like we used to have. We're all trying to survive. We're all trying. And literally when I say we all, it's like all of us, like our ancestors survived. They did. We wouldn't be here if they didn't, And so we all have this genetic link to these survivors from that time. And I think that's what really makes that an incredible story.
I agree.
Yeah. Now, you actually, I didn't answer your question before about the turbidity and things like that. That paper just came out from the Comet Research Group a week ago, where they started to investigate seafloor sediments off of Baffin Island. It's in a place called Baffin Bay. And they found a tremendous amount of impact proxy stuff, that date back to that 12,900 years. And that's what they're doing. What they think happened was that we had an impact event, but it wasn't like a one-time, huge impact. They think that this was like an out of control meteor shower, and it could have been multiple because we go in and out of these meteor showers every year. We can predict them. We just went through a couple just a couple days ago. The Perseids, I think it was, but
I think you're right.
Yeah. And so like one night you're supposed to be able to see 100 of these things, streaking across the sky, and it's pretty. Everybody wishes upon the star as it's blowing up in the atmosphere, and every now and then you might see a big one, a little fireball,
Yeah.
But what they're saying is we went through a really dense patch of one of these meteor showers. More than likely, it was from the Taurid meteor stream, and instead of it being shooting stars that are all ooh pretty. These things would have been terrifying, blowing up in the sky and then causing, bolide, force explosions that literally, can flatten a forest, and this would have been a big deal. You know, the last time we actually saw one of these was back in 2012 in Russia.
Okay.
The Chelyabinsk. I don't know if you can if you want to fit that in here somewhere, but it's a pretty terrifying video clip of a bolide blowing up over a city and like just shattering glass and stuff coming down. And you know, I think about 1,400 people were injured from this. And the time before that was in 1908, and it flattened a huge chunk of Russian.
Is that the Tunguska one?
Yeah, the Tunguska event in 1908.
Okay.
So what they think happened was this would have been like hundreds of Tunguska events in a very short amount of time, and it would have been terrifying.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's the whole Younger Dryas, you know, story.
Right.
So,
I'm glad that you broke it down that way, because I think there is a lot of people who are familiar with it, but they don't understand exactly what it means. It wasn't just like one massive meteorite that hit the ice shelf and caused this cooling. That it makes way more sense that it was a progressive hitting of the ice shelf and maybe other places on Earth, and the Carolina Bays are a result of this.
I don't think so. I don't think so, and I surprise a lot of people. Because I've become so knowledgeable in the Younger Dryas, and I actually have friends that are in a comet research group, and I communicate with them all the time. And for a couple years, I was totally on board because I did think that there was an impact into the ice sheet over Michigan during the Younger Dryas time frame that did create the Carolina Bays. We can get into it a little more later, but throughout my own research and progression of this topic, my mind has changed, and that's important because when it comes to science, if new evidence is presented, like that's what a true scientist should do, is like look at it, and then allow it to change your thoughts and to change your hypothesis and to redirect where you need to go. And that's kind of the progression that I've taken. There's a lot of people that don't do that. I could promise you.
Yes. Well, specifically in this field, right? Like Graham likes to talk about the Clovis, right? And saying there was history before Clovis, but in the institution, history starts at Clovis. I think he says all the time. And his whole joke is things just keep getting older and older. Yeah. And I agree. It almost seems lazy to hold yourself into that position of this is when history began. And you would think that to a group of people who have dedicated their lives to this, that it would be exciting to learn about information that sets time back, or you discover new people or a new settlement or civilization. You'd think that would be it would be the easiest thing to do, would be to change your perspective on it and say, well, hey, look, here's this evidence, let's figure out what that evidence means before we start determining, saying the whole science is settled kind of thing on this. It's kind of a shame, and it holds us back, I think. But I'm glad to hear, that's totally great that you have been presented with different evidence that have changed your view on it. That's, like you said, what's supposed to happen. Right.
Yeah. And now I'm trying to present the evidence that I came across and trying to change a lot of people's minds.
That's interesting.
Because to be honest, when I did think that the Carolina Bays were part of a Younger Dryas story, it was more fun. I had more fun doing it. There's a lot of supporters that are like, oh yeah, Younger Dryas is cool. It's cool, because it does. It ties into that whole Clovis first being just, not being true, and let's change our minds about that. The whole thing about the mega mammals going extinct because the Clovis came over and started killing them all with sticks and stones, and not just the mammoths, but the mastodons and the short-faced bears and the megalodons and all of these, not megalodons, but the glyptodons. Megalodons are those giant sharks. They went extinct like 20 million years ago. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, it'd be kind of wild if they were on land.
Yeah. But it's a neat story. It's a neat story. What I'm hoping to do now, and again, we'll talk about why I think that they're not part of the same event, but what I'm hoping to do now is completely separate. And because what's happening is there's a lot of people that link the two together. They link the Carolina Bays and the Younger Dryas together. And so scientists, for instance, some of the scientists that I talk with, they completely disregard one or the other because people link them together. And so they're like, no, Carolina Bays are not part of the Younger Dryas. Therefore, Carolina Bays aren't impact related. It's what they call that, ad hominem or something. It's like that's not, they could be the result of something similar, just maybe two different times. And it could be another time where they may have happened. And but it stops or it halts any investigation into one or the other. So again, you've got a lot of people that are yeah, they're linking to Carolina Bays, and then they're like, well, then the Younger Dryas isn't real, you know, and so they go on that, and you know, and then nothing gets achieved, you know, none of these things get figured out because there's just so much arguing back and forth. So, you know, in my opinion, I think if I'm able to prove that they are two different events or two different timelines, and let's just completely separate them, and they can become their own two individual hypotheses, that would help both of these hypotheses, the Younger Dryas hypothesis and a glacial ice impact hypothesis for the Carolina Bays. So
it's like Edison's idea of finding out different ways how to not make the light bulb, right? Like yes. If you can say and separate, like you were talking about, the Carolina Bays from the Younger Dryas impact, then you are now eliminating part of what it could go into this hypothesis for the Younger Dryas. So this is not what it is, right? And that helps because now you're pushing toward finding out the truth more, and then you've discovered another truth. And this is like that idea where two truths can be same at the two things can be true at the same time, and we can have these competing, well, not competing, but these parallel ideas, and still drive down into them and figure out what's going on, and it doesn't detract from either of them. In fact, we're just helping out our entire science, you know, in base, right, in doing that. So your drive for this started, like you said, you got told in a Carolina Bay, you know, it's a mystery how we got into, or this got made, and then you heard Randall Carlson talking about it on Joe Rogan. When did you really start deciding this is something I'm going to drill into and learn about and try to come up with a conclusion on?
Yeah, like I said, it wasn't not long after the Randall Carlson talk with Joe Rogan, where, you know, I have this knowledge base, I have the background now, I at least have some credentials that I can, you know, hopefully be taken seriously. And then I started looking at what was already out there for, you know, Carolina Bays. And there was some good stuff. There's a gentleman by the name of Michael Davies, who I'll talk about in a little bit because he's an important part of this story. Yeah. He's also the one that has made the colorized LIDAR that I use available to like everybody. You know, you can use it on Google Earth, which is amazing. And yeah, so it makes it super convenient and super easy to identify and to focus and look at all of these different Carolina Bays at different locations. So and that's why he created it. But now like I said, it's available to everybody. Another guy is Antonio Zamora, who is a good friend of mine. We actually just published a paper together this summer, and we don't agree on everything. So
fair enough.
But I do agree with how he thinks that these Carolina Bays formed, at least for the most part. Enough for us to sit down and spend 8 months working on a paper together and getting it published, you know, in a peer-reviewed journal, which is a pretty big idea, pretty big deal.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, at the time, the stuff that he was putting out, like on YouTube, because he was kind of doing the same thing that I'm doing now. You know, it's like, this is the information. Let's just get it out there, and then, you know, we can let it sort itself out. He's Hispanic, and, you know, he speaks Spanish as his first language, and so there was like a small language barrier there. And then he was putting out these like 45-minute videos, and they were very hard to follow. I was following them, I knew what he was talking about, but I was like, man, this is like, this is gonna be really hard. So you know, I started making some videos. I had a YouTube channel that I started when my daughter was born. It's called the Dabbler's Den. I'm a big dabbler. I'm a big I focus on topics for a short amount of time, just enough to get good at them, and then I move on to something else.
That's me, man.
Yep.
Yeah. 100%.
Yep. And actually, it took a student of mine to explain it that way for me to understand that I was a dabbler. And
I like that.
Yeah, because we were actually in class, and she was going to go to school to be a vet, and she was telling me about how she has all these animals at home. Like, people bring her tortoises and horses and things like that are sick. Wow. And I was like, you know, that's awesome that you're really good at something like that, and that you can turn it into a career and become, you know, successful at something that you really like and that you're really good at. And I told her that, you know, I have a really hard time focusing on something long enough to be really, really good at it, you know, become expert level at it. I get good enough to enjoy it, and then I move on to something else. It's always been like that my whole life. Same. It's ADHD, you know, but
right.
Very hard to focus on something for too long. So anyways, she said, well, then you're really good at being a dabbler. Again, this is like a 16, 17-year-old girl telling me you're really good at being a dabbler. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you know, a dabbler is somebody who does lots of different things. And they, you know, they're really good. And they don't, she also said that the best thing about being a good dabbler is you don't have a hard time trying new things. You know, like you get an idea and you just go do it. You just go try it, you know, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I was like, dadgummit, she's right.
It's true. Well,
I'm a darn good dabbler.
You mentioned about my podcast, right? About how like we talk to all these, and I do. Yes. I like to dabble in everything. You should see my library and hear all these books. They are it's everything from Arthurian legends to the JFK assassinations to whatever. You know, it's just it's crazy. I love being a dabbler, honestly, because it's just life is always fun. You know.
Yep. And I had never really thought of it that way. I always thought it was like, you know, I can't focus on something long enough to become like really good at it, you know? So I just, you know, it's kind of frustrating, you know? And then you look at, you know, your, like you said, your library there, or I go look in my garage and I'm like, you know, that scuba tank's been sitting there for 3 years. I haven't touched it. And it's right next to the kayak that I used like 4 times. And, you know, but anyway, so I started a YouTube channel to kind of focus on some of those things as my daughter was growing up, and we went on some hikes, and we did, you know, I had a whole, just her growing up. And I did that for a while. But then this whole thing with 2015, the Carolina Bays were brought back up, and I started putting together these presentations. And I was like, you know, I got a YouTube channel. It's you know, a good place to host some of these videos. And I started posting videos about the Carolina Bays there. And again, it was mainly to support Michael Davies and Antonio Zamora's work, because there just wasn't enough out there. There wasn't a lot of eyes on it. And so I was making like shorter 10-minute videos, you know, just like breaking it down and explaining it, just like I do at school, you know, where I work. You know, I got to take topics, I got to break them down. And so, you know, I'm been making PowerPoints forever. And, you know, so I just started putting together presentations on this topic, which, by the way, goes completely against being a dabbler.
Yeah,
being button hooked into one topic for nearly 10 years now is killing me. I'm so ready to take this one from me.
Oh my goodness. I was gonna say, does that make you lucky that you found the niche that you're really good at, or does that mean that it's antithetical to your whole personality? Like what
it is kind of. It is. Luckily, I've been able to differentiate things enough, like speaking at the Cosmic Summit or doing these podcasts and things like that. You know, it's cool. It's able to keep it rolling and keep it moving forward. But like if I had to spend all my time writing a paper like I did last year, it would drive me nuts. I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't be a researcher like that, where you literally are spending your nose in the dirt for half the year, and the rest of half the year you're writing papers. And I'm like, no, that's not me. I can't do that. So
hats off to whoever does that, for real.
Exactly, it's not me.
Thank you for your service, for sure.
Yep. So that's why I started putting together the videos. And like I said, it was catching the attention. Luckily, in the hemisphere that I'm in now, with the Randall Carlsons and Carolina Bays being the attention getter for a lot of people. Like I said, Randall Carlson was brought in originally because he was interested in Carolina Bays. George Howard, who, like I said, he is the one who puts on the Cosmic Summit. That's his thing. He was doing Carolina Bay talks back in 1995 or something. And so
it's incredible.
Yeah, and that's what brought him into the whole Younger Dryas circle, because he did publish something about Carolina Bays, and it brought researchers to him, and they brought him onto dig sites and really kind of brought him into the circle, and here we are. We're really making some progress, at least in this field. So we'll see how it goes, but that's where we're at.
Why was your initial hypothesis on this that it was a part of the Younger Dryas impact theory? When you began doing this, how did you get into the science of what you're doing to understand it? And do you think that circle, I guess, with the Younger Dryas and some of the other people talking about it is why sort of upfront that was your conclusion, or was there something else more evidence-based?
Well, it was the evidence that they were finding from the Younger Dryas, because they are finding proxy evidence of an impact. Okay. And we also have to keep in mind that hasn't been 100% proven yet. It's still being debated. It's still, I personally, I think that they have found plenty of evidence to suggest that there were bolide events at the end of our last glaciation cycle to start the Younger Dryas. They don't find it during it. They don't find it after it. But they're finding a layer, literally a black mat layer that dates back to right around that time, 12,800 years ago, that has all of this proxy evidence. It's got platinum, it's got microspherules, it's got micro diamonds, and we don't get these things. There are some processes that can happen on Earth, like maybe a volcanic eruption can create micro diamonds, things like that. But you don't get all of those together at one time unless there's some form of impact event that took place. We look at the sudden rising of sea levels and things like that. They all kind of line up to there being some type of glacial impact event over North America. And bolides could do that. Now, again, back then I was like, well, obviously an impact into the ice sheet makes a lot of sense. We're finding all the proxy evidence for an impact event. We have these scattered elliptical depressions 1,500 kilometers away, in a radial pattern. We'll look at some pictures in a minute and show people, but they're all aligned. They're all like that perfect elliptical shape. They all literally point back to where they came from, and you could track that stuff back, and it literally points to the Michigan area. And so that got us pretty excited. And like I said, Antonio Zamora was the one who was presenting that information, and he was the one who was pushing the Younger Dryas impact as being the Carolina Bays. And I agreed with him. I was like, the evidence for an impact is really high. We have a lot of that. And the evidence for the Carolina Bays being from an impact is really high. So the two are probably connected. And it wasn't until later where I found new evidence, and I was like, oh, no, like that can't be the case. you know, but that's why I connected those two together. Antonio Zamora had done it already. And then I was really just trying to help him out with his hypothesis. And it wasn't until later where I was like, no, this got to be this is something else. Yeah. So, yeah.
How many of these Carolina Bay impacts are there across Georgia, South and North Carolina?
So it's really
a lot of space.
It is. But it's also really complicated because Wikipedia is terrible. It is not a good source.
Yeah.
And that like the page for Carolina Bays has so many errors and so many things that are wrong with it that it really just needs to be scraped and redone. But they won't let guys like me do it. It's going to be the same guys that have been keeping up with it forever that are allowed to do it. And so it's really kind of it's a pain in the neck, really. So if you go to Wikipedia and you look, they're going to say that there's like 500,000 of these Carolina Bays. And they go by many different names. Carolina Bays is just, there's a whole bunch of them in North and South Carolina, so that name kind of sticks. These elliptical depressions are found in other places, like in the Delmarva Peninsula, and they're called the Delmarva Bays. They're found in Maryland, they're found in Delaware. And they all have their own different names. My favorite one is Pocosons. That's the Native American term for swamp on a hill. Yeah, okay. Pocosin. I really kind of wish we just stuck with that. Yeah. I keep in the comments section, people are like, "How many times is this guy gonna say Carolina Bays?"
Right. Pocosins. So, that's like
Pocosins just rolls a little better. Yeah, kind of like the sound of it.
I agree.
So if we can't go with impact basins, then Pocosins sounds like a good second best. But
you have my vote.
Anyways, where was I going with that? I forgot.
I was asking you about how many there are. You were saying that.
Wikipedia okay. So
yeah.
So Wikipedia says there's like 500,000 of them. Michael Davis, the guy who did the LIDAR stuff, the reason why he was using USGS LIDAR to look for Carolina Bays was because he was making a survey. He was actually counting them and measuring them and putting them into what he called the Carolina Bay Survey at the time. He has since changed the name to Ovoid Basin Survey because he started to include some other ovoid depressions that we could talk about later because they're actually in my presentation I shared. But
yeah.
But literally he has put his finger, his mouse on at least 70,000 Carolina Bays.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is. And I think his actual survey has it's closer to 77,000 or 80,000. But like I said, a fraction of those aren't actual Carolina Bays. They're something else. But as far as the like elliptical shaped depressions, there's around 70,000, and that's a lot. That's a lot of those things.
That is.
Yeah. And and that's too many for variable wind and water, ponded water to create these shapes. And that's kind of where, at the beginning where it's like that doesn't make scientific sense. And again, myself being a science educator, that actually was probably like what made me start doing this, because as a science educator, I take these complex ideas and I break them down and I I try to educate or at least entertain my students. And I couldn't do it with the Carolina Bays. It's like, this is flawed. There's a problem here. They're not following the scientific method. And that's super important, that you follow the scientific method, that you go through the steps. And if it doesn't work out, then you go backwards and you start again or whatever. And that wasn't done with the Carolina Bays. And I can show you where it wasn't done, throughout that whole process. But that's what it is. It was a failure or breakdown of the scientific method that really made me like, it's got to be something else. And
where did that breakdown happen?
Well, it's happening right now because, again, they're not going back and checking their hypotheses. The last time anybody has really tried to explain the Carolina Bays through mechanical processes was 1977. Yeah, I'm 48. I'll be 48 in November, and that's the year I was born.
Right.
So it's been my entire life that they literally are using, and it wasn't even a peer-reviewed scientific paper that they used. It was some guy's PhD dissertation where he set up a sand table and he tried to make a Carolina Bay with a fan, and that's where all of these researchers that are claiming the Carolina Bays were formed by wind and water, that's the bottom assumption on a whole stack of assumptions on top of it, and it's really irritating.
I was going to say that seems like a base layer you should not use as an expert opinion, right?
No, you're
supposed to be defending this, right, as a dissertation.
Exactly. And nobody has done it. Nobody. I mean, I can't even. Yeah. So that was where the breakdown occurred, and now to continue that on is just it's just a disaster.
Okay. So if I could just keep asking you about the geological evidence, because I do think it's really interesting to learn about, because it exhibits what we're talking about. What other, you talked about this mat layer of all these different minerals, I guess, and other things that exist in there. What other geological evidence exists that supports these impacts, just to learn about? So are we specifically talking about the Younger Dryas? We can talk about that, or we can talk about the Carolina Bays. More specifically, the Carolina Bays would be your area of expertise for.
Yeah. So there are. It's hard. It's hard to talk about because we're talking about really extreme timelines, right? So 12,800 years ago was the end of our last glacial cycle. We do have that black layer. We have the extinction of the mega mammals. There's a Clovis, the people that we literally blamed for killing all these mega mammals. Their culture also went extinct at the time. Not necessarily all the people, but their culture dropped off,
as a civilization.
Yeah. And so they came back as a Folsom culture or something like that. It was a completely different culture afterwards. So that's all stuff that we use for the Younger Dryas. Now, I think that the Carolina Bays formed during a time, around it would be mid-Pleistocene in age, and that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. Okay. And it gets a little messy because we're talking about a really long time ago. The mid-Pleistocene transition. This is a time frame where we literally see things like that was when the last time we had a major pole reversal, like a pole shift. We have had minor ones, more recently, and right now our pole's kind of wandering around and things like that. But the last time there was a reversal that's dated in our C-core data and things like that was around 790,000 years ago. There was a major. That's also when the Homo sapiens and Neanderthals split from a common ancestor. And I always forget the name of what our direct common ancestor was, but there was a split between genetics between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens at around 800,000 years ago. There was also a 99% genetic bottleneck that took place at that time. So whatever, there had to have been something serious that happened then to cause species to differentiate and split and to drastically.
That polar reversal was part of that.
It was part of it. Yep.
Such a cataclysmic thing that happens. Okay. Wow.
We also had a major shift in our obliquity. which is one of our Milankovitch cycles, which it basically means that there was an issue with the tilt of the Earth.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
All right.
Yeah. So the tilt of our Earth is what gives us our seasons. As right now it's at 23.5 degrees, and we go around the sun, 365 days a year, and it's because we have a tilt, and sometimes we're tilted away from the sun, sometimes we're tilted towards the sun. When we're tilted towards the sun, it's summer. When we're tilted away from the sun, it's winter, right? There was a shift in that occurred around that same time during the mid-Pleistocene. And we were having, before that, we had ice ages or glaciation cycles that would come and go every like 40,000 years or so. And for some reason, during the mid-Pleistocene, that 40,000 year cycle stretched out to be 100,000 years. And that's super important because you add 100,000 year glaciation cycles, you're adding 60,000 extra years of ice on top of the poles, and that's where we start seeing our the North and the South Pole, just being completely covered in glaciers, and that adds to more ice, and that adds to more melting, and so as you go in and out of these glaciation cycles, it's all wonky. So, but again, that all took place at around that mid-Pleistocene. The big kicker, like when we start talking about how does this apply to impacts? During that time, that was when the AA Tectites were formed down. Do you know what a Tectite is?
I feel like I do, but I don't want to say yes. And
I actually have a couple of them, and I meant to bring them in here. But a Tectite is when we have an impact, and the rock, sandstones or whatever, become molten, and they get flung out from the impact site, and they turn into glass in the atmosphere, and then they come back down. So you end up getting melt glass raining back down onto the planet. We have a strewn field. Yeah, we have a strewn field of Tectites in South Asia and Australia, and that whole ocean in between those two, where they just find these like black glass rocks. They're this big. They're tear shaped or they're button shaped, and basically you had this molten material being ejected from someplace on Earth and re-solidifying and then raining back down onto planet Earth. 786,000 years ago was during that same time, during that same Pleistocene transition event. And these AA Tectites, they're found on, like I said, in South Asia and Australia. But what's interesting is that location is the antipod of Michigan, where I think the impact that created the Carolina Bays are. And that's what Michael Davies and a friend of mine, Tim Harris, they've been writing papers about that for a couple years now. About 15 years they've been saying this, that the AA Tectites, and my Tim Harris, the research partner of Michael Davies, he used to work for Boeing and Lockheed Martin as an engineer, and some of his friends were in the ballistic missile nuclear programs, and they used those physics to look at the re-entry and the launch, ballistic launch of these AA Tectites, and they go right back to Michigan. And
wow, that's incredible.
As of right now, it's still a mystery. They don't know where the Tectites came from. And then these guys are like, go look in Michigan. Even the sandstones of Michigan have a chemical match to the AA Tectites, but nobody wants to give it.
I was just going to say, other than the trajectory of this, right? What is there geological evidence that links them with the unique minerals that exist inside them?
And they use, there's a certain type of dating method that they use for them too. I think it's like beryllium something dating.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the it dates back, the rocks, the parent rock of these AA Tectites, which is a sandstone, which was high in certain levels of silica and something else. The parent rock would have been Jurassic in age. And when we look at Michigan itself, like go back to Michigan, the bedrock of Michigan is a perfect bullseye shape basin. The Michigan Basin is a perfect bullseye shape, and literally like Michigan itself is like it's shaped like a glove, like a mitt, the mitten of Michigan.
Yeah.
The center of that is Jurassic age sandstones and there's a huge chunk of it's missing. And that could be where it is now, is in South Asia and Australia, on the complete opposite side of the earth. So again, we're talking about like a major deal. Like this would have been an event that would have been really, really serious. Global. Like serious enough to send huge chunks of ice from Michigan to come crashing back down in places like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. And on top of that, we also find them in like Nebraska and Kansas. And they all point back to Michigan.
Right.
Yeah.
This makes me think of like blood spatter analysis.
That's such a great yes. And there's got to be somebody in your audience that is into that does blood spatter analysis.
Yeah.
Because I would love to have a blood splatter expert analyze this and you know, because that's exactly what it's like. Yes.
Things coming from a source, right, and going out from that source. And
in fact, yeah, I can make miniature Carolina bays at the beach. You and I can just go to the beach and like kick water from the ocean, you know, from the ocean onto the beach or a lake or whatever, onto the beach sand, and it will form perfect elliptical shapes. They're small. They're scale invariant, which is a geological term that you just take that same thing and make it bigger. You know, that's what water does. It's really good at scale invariance. You know, right. Streams, it doesn't matter if it's the Mississippi River or somebody's backyard creek. You know, they all behave the same, and so you have this scale invariance with things like that, and that's what I think we're seeing here is it is that splatter. It's that impact and the secondary glacial ejecta being launched and coming back down and creating these massive, and they're huge. They're huge. They're not small. These things are really, they're like miles long, some of them.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, when we go back and look at the current academically accepted hypothesis is that they were all lakes and they were all swirling around during the last ice age to create perfect ellipses. That's where I'm like, that's
all of them.
I made the mistake of telling well, he's actually an astrophysicist, but I told him, I was like,
okay,
it's impossible, dude. It's impossible. And that really, like, he shut down. He didn't want to talk to me after that because he said I was being too direct. And I was like, but dude, it's impossible. There's no way that wind and water could do this over and over and over again. It's impossible.
Right.
It just can't happen. He didn't like that. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. He also wouldn't read my paper, which was really irritating. But anyways.
Oh, wow.
Well,
that's a shame. You know, you would think somebody with the background in astrophysics would be a good person to talk about this sort of thing because they study these trajectories.
Well, and this guy is actually on the Common Research Group. He's actually like one of the leading members of the Common Research Group. And again, he's one of the ones that is pushing the Carolina Bays as being wind and water created because he just wants to remove them from the Younger Dryas timeline. And I was like, dude, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to remove them. You know, but in order for us to be able to do that, you have to accept that they're both impact related.
Right. Well, arriving at a conclusion means you also have to remove things. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. To arrive at that conclusion. I got to ask you, like, this is probably just like a totally opinion based question, but like, what do people like that have to benefit from sticking to that theory of how these were created or anything really? You know. Yeah.
So right now, because again, my biggest critics are actually on the Common Research Group. Okay. You know, the most vocal people that are like, no, the Carolina Bays are not impact related. They're on the Common Research Group because they're trying to prove the Younger Dryas was an actual event. I agree with them. I do think it was an actual event, right? One of the biggest Carolina Bay researchers is Dr. Christopher Moore out of South Carolina. And he is the chairman right now of the Common Research Group. So, you can imagine, you know, walking right into the lion's den and saying, I don't think you're right about the Carolina Bays.
Sure.
He doesn't like that. Nobody likes to be told that, right? Yeah. And so they just clam up and they don't even address the things that I'm bringing up. And that's the most irritating part. Mm-hmm. You know, I literally have a paper that is in a peer-reviewed journal right now and they won't read it. You know, it's like, well, then how do we move forward then, gentlemen? Because that's the way this happens. That's the way it was supposed to work.
Well, you're ignoring evidence.
Yeah. So again, they're trying to focus on the Younger Dryas, and I totally agree with them. You know, I think they should prove that first. You know, go ahead. Let's get everybody on board with that one because I think there's enough evidence. They're putting out papers 2 or 3 times a year now that are big papers. Mm-hmm. They're still controversial because it's what science is. You know, it's how it works. There's really only a few like really vocal scientists that are against the Younger Dryas. They have an army of people that like email them and contact them in the background that don't want to make themselves public because these few people have such a large mouth that it causes problems. Like they have their fingers in scientific journals, and you know, if these guys try to publish a paper in a certain scientific journal, they just call up the editor and like, hey, I don't want you don't be posting this this paper on the Younger Dryas in your paper,
Right.
and then they will say okay, and they just decline it. They'll say it's not a good fit or something like that for our paper.
Yeah.
And then
Gatekeeping.
and then exactly, and then when I try to publish a paper on Carolina bays in their journal, they didn't want to. They were like, no. So, and they had like they actually said they would, but they gave me like this like grocery list of things that I had to change, and I was like, if I do all that, then it's not my paper anymore. It's yours, and I don't. That's not the point of this.
Right.
So I'll go find another journal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
no, I don't blame you, man. The suppression is disappointing to hear about. It sounds like it's a problem in every field.
Yeah, and I told them that too. I was like, you guys are doing the exact same thing those guys are doing to you, and it sucks. I know. I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. So you walk into a room with these guys. What's the best evidence you're hitting them with to show what you're coming up with is the reality?
So right now, I mean, there's a lot of evidence. Obviously, there's a lot of missing evidence because the location I think this happened and the timeline that I think it happened is so far back that there's a tremendous amount of erosion. And in that location, like of Michigan, it's since when I think they were formed, 7 or 8 ice ages have happened or glaciation cycles have happened. So literally Michigan itself has been scoured by sheet glaciers 7 or 8 times since when I think this thing formed. The shape of them, I think, is a huge deal. That was what the paper was about, was actually pointing out that a vast majority of them are mathematically elliptical. And we came up with a protocol. We actually, we use the least squares method, and you take like a LIDAR image of any of the Carolina bays, and you place points all around the internal part of the rim, and then you put it through a program that Antonio Zamora created, and it will create ellipse for the points that you created, and it's like I said, it's a perfect match. It comes up with these, and we're finding that almost every single one that we've looked at has like a percent error margin of like 3%. It's like a very minor percentage. Like most of them are like less than 2%. Sure. And that's like, the precision level of these ellipses, that's like industrial precision. It is. That doesn't happen with natural processes. And so to me, that's one of the biggest, lines of evidence that says that these cannot be formed by natural wind and water processes for over hundreds of thousands of years, from what their hypothesis is stating. Now, at the same time, I have to use that same logic and say, well, then how could they have survived 780,000 years? Right?
Good point.
Right? And so the other line of evidence that I'm using now is actual shoreline data from the last few times that the sea levels were higher than today. I had again, for a long time, I was completely on board with Antonio Zamora and that these were Younger Dryas related. And I actually had a discussion it was kind of an argument that I had with Michael Davies, where he was using the term pool table flat. He's like, the coastal plain is pool table flat. And, that actually, he was using that as evidence for why the Carolina bays are able to survive hundreds of thousands of years, because it's so flat that, it really would take a lot of action to remove a Carolina bay once it's formed. Okay. He was saying that even if you have wind blow over it, it'll eventually become that shape again, and it'll just always be that shape. And I remember when he was explaining it that way, I was like, that's bull. That's not true. And the point that I was trying to make was like, it's not pool table flat. Like we have down where I live in coastal Georgia, we have ancient barrier islands that during the Pleistocene age, sea levels were higher than they are today. Right now we have the beach forming at the beach, right? That's a process. You have waves crashing onto the shore. We just had a hurricane that went up the East Coast and just, destroyed beach homes and things like that in North Carolina and South Carolina. So those kind of things happen. But the last time sea levels were higher than they are today was around 125,000 years ago, which is the Eemian time frame. And not only that, but sea levels were higher than, they were about 30 feet higher than today. Now, geologically speaking, that's not that long ago, and it was literally the last interglacial. So we live in an interglacial right now. Sea levels are up. We have a beach forming. We have really nice warm temperatures, and we can grow enough food to feed 8.2 billion people on planet Earth during our current interglacial. It's a pretty incredible time to be a human.
No kidding.
Why are we fighting each other all the time and just being idiots? But
Great
it's
question,
a really great
man.
time to be alive. But the last time that sea levels were like that, it was 125,000 years ago, where temperatures were a tad bit warmer, without the use of fossil fuels, mind you. But we can actually go back and find those barrier islands that were formed 125,000 years ago. And I went to go show Michael Davis using his LIDAR. I was like, dude, it's not pool table flat. Let me show you. I pulled it up, and what I saw, though, it really was like the initial gut punch that kind of took the air out of me. And again, nobody likes to be told they're wrong. Nobody likes to be, to prove themselves
wrong. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, kind of punching yourself in the face.
Yes, exactly. I'm here trying to prove him wrong, and then I pull it up, and really what it was I started focusing on where you don't see the Carolina Bays. I had always been focusing on where we find Carolina Bays, and actually looking at Carolina Bays. I would spend hours and hours looking at LIDAR and trying to find these Carolina Bays and, making comparisons and things like that. But I didn't really spend a lot of time focusing on where they're not. And when I pulled up those ancient barrier island maps on his LIDAR, I saw there were no Carolina Bays below that shoreline. None. There are no. Not only that, but there are Carolina Bays that are truncated. There are Carolina Bays that were full elliptical shaped Carolina Bays, and now we only see a part of it. Which there's only one way that can happen, and that's that. And we're talking about 30 feet up. We're not talking about right at the beach. We're talking about 30 feet up. If the event happened during the Younger Dryas, sea levels were up to 100 miles away. Not at the Younger Dryas, sea levels had already risen up a little bit. It was still about 280 feet lower than today.
Okay.
280 feet, that's a lot. And it was still, probably, 50 or so miles away. We're talking really far away from the ocean at that point. There should be Carolina Bays all the way up to our current beach because sea levels haven't reached this level until today. Now they kind of leveled off at around 6,000 years ago. But we should be able to see Carolina Bays all the way up to the beach. And the fact that there are 0 Carolina Bays below 30 feet was really telling. And I was like, oh, crap. Because Michael Davis has always been telling me, he's like, no, these things are a lot older, right? And I was like, no, they're Younger Dryas. And then all of a sudden it's like, there's no way these could be Younger Dryas. No way. It's impossible now.
Yeah.
And so that was a difficult one for me. It took me a couple months to produce another video or anything like that because I really had to process it because I was like, hold on, there's got to be something that I must be missing something, and
crisis.
Yeah, and Antonio was like, well, what about tsunamis or what about hurricanes? And I'm like, dude, the sea levels were so much farther away. I mean, we literally had a hurricane that came up, and it was, there was beach erosion, but that beach was still way out there. That there's no way that this could have happened.
It doesn't really jive, yeah.
Yeah, and tsunamis don't work that way. Tsunamis, they will go up. If you hear about a really large tsunami, it's because they were pushed up into a valley or something like that. And then you would see the ribbons, and there would be evidence of it. There's zero evidence for tsunamis along the East Coast, during that time frame. So it's that tells me that they have to be older than the last time sea levels rose. I also think that I see evidence where the last time before that, where sea levels were higher than today or even higher than then, was around 400,000 years. There were other glaciation cycles in between there, but they didn't come up as high as our current shoreline. So there were barrier islands formed during that time, but they're under ocean water now. They're like sandbars and stuff now. But yeah. So it looks like there's evidence of there being the Carolina Bays being there around 400,000 years ago, because that's when sea levels were about 42 feet higher than today.
That's amazing.
And so there's a transition area where there's nothing below the coastline at 30 feet down. Between 30 and 42 feet, there's heavily eroded Carolina Bays. But then every Carolina Bay above 42 feet, they're pristine, man. They look good because they haven't been exposed to ocean water since,
Well, say that really does help you timeline exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
It
doesn't. It's a relative age. It doesn't give me an absolute date because,
right.
but I can at least say they have to be older than this date, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the only other people that are talking about this, and again, we have evidence of an impact with the Tectites and all that, was at the mid-Pleistocene, 780,000 years ago. And again, there's evidence to at least suggest that there was an impact into the Michigan area, that's where we think these Carolina Bays would have come from, was that impact. So
yeah,
yep.
I would think it had to be, first off, what you said, it was almost like ontologically shocking to see what you saw when you the LIDAR scan. But what other evidence using LIDAR is most beneficial to your field of study with this?
I don't know. I mean, it's just being able to see something that flat. We'll look at some pictures, just to see the difference between like what we can see with our aerial photos or what we get like Google Earth now. You can't. There's just so much going on. There's so much information. You've got the fields. You have different colors, and you have towns that have been built and highway systems and things like that. It's hard to see those, but when you use the LIDAR, it strips all that down, and all you're seeing is the bare ground. On top of that, Michael Davis uses a color pattern. It confuses some people at first because they're not used to seeing that. Usually when you pull up like a USGS LIDAR, it's just grayscale, and it's pretty boring. You could still see what you're supposed to be looking for. But what he has done is he's made kind of a topo map version of LIDAR, which is really helpful when we're looking at this pool table flat terrain that he was telling me about. But that really helps because it also shows you how flat the internal portion of these Carolina Bays are. It shows you the rims and how elevated the rims are compared to how flat it is at the in the middle of these Carolina Bays. It shows you that elliptical shape, that rimmed all the way around. It shows you everything that you need to know, just by looking at the LIDAR. And it, like I said, it gets rid of any of the confusion. Like all the other stuff is removed, and you just see the ground, which is really helpful. Yeah.
Well, earlier you said that there was a Native American name for these. Pocosin? Is that
Pocosin? Yeah.
Pocosin, yeah. There's so many different Native American or other, like I guess you could say, native cultures that have stories for natural shapes, natural, what's the word I'm looking for here? Formations, right? They have their own legends, they have their own lore and history. When it comes to the Carolina Bays, do the tribes in the area here, they have their own word for them. But is there a semblance in their lore about how these things came to be?
Yeah, there is. Lake Waccamaw is a good example of that, and we can look at some pictures of Lake Waccamaw. It's supposed to be the largest Carolina Bay. We don't think so, and we can look at the LIDAR of that too, because it actually looks like there was 3 Carolina Bays that formed, and it's also in the middle of the Waccamaw River Valley. And we don't usually find Carolina Bays in these river valleys. So we're not quite like, that's actually the worst example to use, and it's the one that's brought up most. But yeah, I want to say like, I think the people that they call it like the land of the falling star or something like that. I think that's what like Waccamaw meant, or somebody can correct me, I'm sure, but. But that's kind of the term that the people gave, that like it was an impact. It was created by the impact. The thing though about like the Younger Dryas time frame and the Clovis people and the original Native Americans, they were using these Pocosins. They were using them for waterfowl hunting, and actually like getting food. Especially after the mega mammals were gone, this is where they got a lot of their sustenance from, and they find evidence of waterfowl processing. Like they find, it's kind of an interesting story because Christopher Moore, the one I was talking about earlier, he has some archaeological. He's actually a geoarchaeologist, and he does a lot of work in Carolina Bays because they're such great archaeological sites. But they were finding camps, Clovis camps, on the rims of Carolina Bays, and they kept finding these like little smooth pebbles, like these little smooth rocks, like at the sites, and they couldn't figure out what they were. They were actually just tossing them, like, where are these coming from? And it turns out that they were actually like the gizzard stones of ducks and
no kidding,
and turkeys and things like that they were hunting in these Pocosins. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And so, but again, if that's the case, then they were living there. They were using them at that Younger Dryas time frame when the Clovis people were there, and so that really kind of, again, for a while, like I was like trying to find a way to fit that in. Like they could have been there and that's what caused them to die, you know, was the impact itself. And we could talk about inverted stratigraphy too, because that's one of the things that Chris Moore found is like the rims of the bays have an inverted stratigraphy where you start going down in days and ages. I mean, and you go like, you know, 5,000 year, 8,000 years. Then you get down to around the 13,000 years time frame and you'll go like 11, 15, 13. And there's like this weird inversion there at the Younger Dryas time frame. Antonio Zamora considers that as a smoking gun evidence that that's when they were created.
That makes sense.
It does. And I tell him that's a good, you know, that's good science to follow that through. But you also have to, there are other ways that could happen. And I think that all of the dates, they use a method called optically stimulated luminescence to date these Carolina bays, where they dig a trench and then they have to take cores, not going down, but they have to go into the side of the rim. And optically stimulated luminescence dating can tell you the last time like a quartz grain was exposed to sunlight. And that's where they're getting their dates from. Yeah, it is kind of neat. And so I think they're dating erosion events. So I think they're dating the last time, like there was a major windstorm or something, and wind was being blown up and down these Carolina Bay rims. And the Younger Dryas would have been a major erosion event. You would have, so the problem though is if wind is blowing at night, it's not going to lock in those optically stimulated luminescence dates of the sunlight, right? So it's just going to be the last time it was blown by the wind or something. And so they're picking up older dates. In the same layers, so you can actually have sand because they're measuring like grains of sand, right? And so if you have wind that's moving around at night, and you can easily give you inverted stratigraphy that way. And they're finding dates that go back. They're finding dates that go back 100,000 years, right? And eventually you end up outdating the method. Like same thing with carbon dating. Like you can only go back so far, and then it's carbon dead. It doesn't work anymore. Yeah. Same thing. So I think carbon dating only goes back 60,000 years, something like that. And then it's like, it just doesn't, it's carbon dead. You can't use that method anymore. That's why the OSL or that optically stimulated luminescence dating is a more accurate record. But even that only goes back 300,000 years. And we're looking at time frames that are, you know, older than at least 400,000 years, you know, and that's, and so you you outdate your methods to find these things. So, and that's why I think the shoreline data does help give us a better idea for the formation of these Carolina bays. Yeah. You know, because those beaches that were created and formed are well dated. We can date those and we know when those things happened, you know, and the fact that they're Carolina bays on top of them, but not below them, you know, we can use that as a relative dating method to say they got to be older than these ages. Yeah. So at least that should be at least enough to get those guys to pay attention and reinvestigate the formation, but they're not even looking. So
that's a shame. Yeah, I would love to look at some of your presentation that you'd sent.
Yeah. Do you want me to pull it up on my end, or you want to pull it up on your end?
Let's pull it up on your end. That way you can move it around a little bit easier. Okay. Right. You don't have to rely on me, who doesn't know exactly what I should point at. Look at that. That's so wild.
I know. I come with goods, man. I'm ready to go.
Heck yeah. Let's do this.
Yeah. And then, you know, this is just the intro slide, you know, but this is actually a really good spot just to start us. You know, again, these are those ellipses that I'm talking about. These all those ellipses right there, Carolina bays. But let's see, how do I advance?
Some of them even look tiered.
Some of them do, yeah. And we can look at different. There's some varieties that it depends on the elevation where they're created. Let's see. There we go. I'll skip through some of these slides. This is part of a bigger presentation that kind of explains what we already talked about, like the whole breakdown of the scientific method and the the need to go back and reform hypotheses and things like that. You know, and I do this with my students at school, basically showing them that they're all scientists as long as they're using the scientific method. And it's kind of an important part of the story because a lot of the people, like even myself, you know, and Antonio Zamora and Michael Davies and Tim Harris, like none of them are geologists. Like I have the most like credits in advanced like geology classes than any of than any of them. But they don't have those credentials, and so a lot of times people just completely ignore them. But they're all scientists. They all and they're actually like real scientists in their own careers, right? You know,
Right.
they do use the scientific method, and they're really good at problem solving, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve this problem. And you know, I make the point that, you know, any decision that you make is using that process, and if you do it correctly, then you're a scientist, right?
And institutions weren't always around, yet people were doing this before we created the institution to give somebody that degree.
Exactly.
Right? You know.
Yeah. I think it was like Bacon, Sir Charles Bacon. Francis Bacon. He's the one who finally like put it down. But you're right. It's like just as I put on the screen, you know, just trying to decide what you're going to eat for breakfast is using the process. You form a hypothesis, you test it, you collect and analyze your data, you know, you draw your conclusions, and then was it a good idea or a bad idea? And I used the example of like eating dry shredded wheat out of the block like that, out of the box, you know, or getting like a breakfast burrito on the way to school, you know.
No doubt.
So you know, and you come up with your hypotheses, you know, and you find out whether they're valid or not through the process of science. And
no doubt.
Again, I see the breakdown of this in the explanation of the Carolina Bays, especially when it comes to variables. And like, you know, in this process, you know, as any fourth grader learns when they're learning this, you know, any change in any variable in an experiment is going to give you different events, you know, or different outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's all part of the process, and that wasn't done in this Carolina Bay explanation either. So about the Carolina Bays, you know, like I said, there's a whole bunch of them. They come with all kinds of different names. I got a list of them right there. We probably should have explained this from the very beginning. That the Carolina Bays, the name bay actually comes from the bay trees that grow inside of them. The bay tree is like a really swamp-loving tree that we have here in the South. They do grow. There's a type of bay tree that they grow in the Mediterranean that they use for like spaghetti and stuff, like bay leaves for cooking with. Yeah, and even here in the South, there's bay trees that they pick the leaves off of and they put them in crab oil and stuff like that. Like Old Bay gets its name from bay leaves, right? And so that's where the Carolina Bays, where they got their name from, is this just a really good location for bays to grow. We also have like Venus flytraps are growing some of these, and pitcher plants and things like that. So there's some really neat.
Oh, that's cool.
The ecology is really fascinating. I have a lot of friends that are ecologists, and this was their study. In fact, was Carolina Bays.
Awesome.
Yeah. These were the first pictures that we got of the Carolina Bays. Again, we have known about them for thousands of years. You know, the Native Americans were using them as hunting sites for a long time. So it's not like they just all of a sudden were discovered. But it wasn't until we were able to get high enough off the ground to realize how extensive they were, right? And the shapes of them and how similar they were to one another. And this was a picture that was taken. This is now a Heritage Bay Preserve, but it was being done back in the 1930s. It had something to do with the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, and trying to find better ways to grow crops and things like that. And that's why they did the survey. But it's neat. You can see those are all individual pictures, and that's how we used to do this. Really, up until like the 90s, they were like we didn't have satellites scanning down on the ground and collecting all this information. They were literally flying airplanes and taking pictures, and you would go to databases. Yeah, you would go to database. Even in the military, they were doing that. Right? You know, and then they would just paste them all together, and you would get your mosaic of the area. And they published this in a newspaper, the Harper's Ferry, and everybody in the area was freaking out. They're like, "What the heck is this?" You know, they automatically went to like meteor impacts. They automatically went to craters back in the 30s, which is ironic, right? Because instantly people look at this and they're like, "Oh, that looks like the moon." You know, it looks like a crater field.
Yes. That was my first thought. I was just ready to say, like, it looks like the moon, and it's because of the color. But, like, I have a question for you related to that, but keep going. I don't want to derail you.
Well, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, can we look at the moon and the impacts? Like, this looks so similar as an evidence base, I guess, of the moon gets hit all the time, right? Like, does that support, or is that not quite enough?
So the biggest thing. So now keep in mind that when they first came up with this picture, it was in the 1930s. And the first thing they did was they went to go look for like meteors. They went to go look for evidence of this, right? And they didn't find it. Keeping in mind that the moon being cratered like it is, like those are direct impacts from, meteors and asteroids and things like that, things that are pelting it. And so you have all of that energy coming from space hitting the moon like really, really hard, right? And so we end up with all these like circular shape, because they're actually, you know, they're not elliptical on the moon. Most of them are all elliptical, unless it's like a really low angle. I think there's maybe one or two craters that have more of an elliptical shape to them, and it's because they kind of came in really low.
Yeah.
But most of them are going. Even then, most of them would be circular shape, because it's really the energy and the shock wave that creates the crater itself, right?
Yeah.
But nobody at that time, back in the 1930s, was relating this to secondary impacts, right? Nobody was saying like, oh, there was an impact into Michigan onto an ice sheet to create these Carolina bays. They thought that these were the results of direct impacts from meteors, right? Even Randall Carlson, you know, he first learned about these back in the 70s, and he was doing all his research back in the 70s, and that's the information that he was getting. Even today, he still thinks that they were formed from bolides, like Tunguska. And like I was like, Randall, like we go to these conferences together, and we sit down and have dinner and stuff. And I was like, Randall, I really want to sit down and we can talk about this, because, you know, there's some subtle differences here that kind of prove that wrong. And a lot of people listen to Randall, and if he says it, it's law now. And I'm like, Randall, can we just talk about it for a little bit? And we actually did. I have a.
So he seems like he'd listen.
Yeah, well, he did. I don't know if you've seen the interview, but we did a discussion on his Squaring the Circle podcast, and he did kind of seem like he was like, you know, he at least made him scratch his head, and that's good.
That's what you want, though, right? You're piquing curiosity.
Yeah. So, anyways, back in the 30s, you know, that wasn't even like a thought, like a impact into an ice sheet wasn't even something that was even being considered, right? But this did bring up a lot of interest and a lot of debate, and it really came down to terrestrialism or uniformitarianism or catastrophism, right? You either had impacts, or we're going to go with the tried and true geology of slow over a long period of time, which is what uniformitarianism is. And that's a geologic law. That's a principle of geology that, you know, things change on Earth, one grain of sand and one gust of wind and one drop of rain at a time. And that happens over millions of years. You know, we started our conversation today talking about the Grand Canyon, you know, and I had that as an 8-year-old brain thinking, oh man, this just happened because I saw a pile of wet leaves.
Right.
But geology is like, no, this took millions of years, and that whole area is slowly rising while the river is flowing through there and cutting it down. And that makes sense to me. And you know, there are people out there that think that the Grand Canyon still happened very suddenly as a catastrophic flood, but I don't think so. The geology matches the terrain there for uniformitarianism being an event. Now, there may be punctuated events that happen that flood in that area and can cause some things that you know is another part of a discussion. But as far as how they formed, it's uniformitarianism is probably the most likely cause. But then on the same token, we know that catastrophic things happen. You know, we have the impact crater in Arizona. Did you happen to see that when you were in Arizona?
No, I was only there, like I said, for the wedding. We went to the Grand Canyon for maybe 2 hours, and I wish I could. I have plans on going back.
Yeah, I want to go to the crater too. I haven't been there yet, but so anyways, we know that these things do happen, that we do get punched. You know, we talked about Tunguska, we talked about the Chelyabinsk, you know, the bolide that blew up over Chelyabinsk and injured a bunch of people. You know, these things happen, and we go in and out of these meteor showers every single year. They're predictable. We know we're gonna do it. You know.
Yeah.
And so that really set up a debate, and literally from like the 1930s until this day, today, it still hasn't been, you know, answered. It's still a debate today about whether or not this was something that was uniform or catastrophic, and it's really a debate that goes back to, you know, like 300 or 400 years ago when Darwin was trying to present his stuff, and you know the whole. You know, it was a debate against like biblical religion versus exactly versus, you know, geology, and so I still think today we find that geologists are really hard. You know, it's really hard for them to consider and agree on a catastrophic event, and that's why like the dinosaurs, it took forever for them to finally realize that, hey, okay, yeah, this was an asteroid related event that caused the extinction of those dinosaurs. You know, so and it took them finding a huge crater in Mexico to finally agree. They're like, okay, you guys got us. It was a catastrophic event, but that's the only one. We can't talk about any other ones.
That's it, right? Well, the concept of, I guess, religion is that hard box we were talking about at the beginning of the show that kind of keeps you trapped inside without thinking outside of it. You know, and it's a shame. And I might be in the minority in this, but I think that, you know, if you look at it from a creationist standpoint, it doesn't explain how things happened. You know, there's no, it doesn't say it was one thing or the other specifically. Like, we don't have, I don't know, methodology, I guess, is all I'm saying, you know, that we don't have that answer. And so I just don't see, if you could open your mind a little bit more, not you, but like hypothetically, if you could open your mind a little bit more, then you could make room for these sorts of things, you know?
Exactly. And that's kind of, like I said, my flat earth friend Jamie first sent me Randall Carlson's a talk on Joe Rogan's podcast, because he was talking about mega floods, you know, and that was a biblical story, you know, and you know, yes, we're finding more and more evidence that, you know, some of these stories had a base, you know, they had a you know, a beginning, and they had a truth to them, and so it's really
myth exists all over.
Exactly, yes, yeah. So being so hard nosed to completely ignore those things, or like the Native American stories that you brought up a minute ago, like the Lake Waccamaw stuff, you know, a lot of times they're completely ignored. Like they won't even read them, because, you know, that's just
immediately discredited. Right.
Yeah, it's just legend. It's not real, you know. But the Native Americans are like, it's absolutely real. We've been telling this story for thousands of years. What are you telling?
Right. We live here. We have our own lore.
Exactly. And then you end up with these like two sides fighting back and forth. It's like, you guys realize you're telling the same story. You're just doing it in two different ways. Let's relax a little bit.
That way, man. Yeah. It's a parallel economy of information, and doesn't make it wrong, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So since the 1930s, there have been a ton of hypotheses about these Carolina Bays. Again, if you don't have an answer, it could be anything. And so literally it's like 100 years, 90-something years of people, you know, throwing wads against the wall to see if they stick. and so far we haven't had anything like really stick, you know. The main academically accepted hypothesis is that wind and water created these things, and like I said, the impact keeps coming up. There's so much evidence that makes the suggestion that that's what happened. You know, that one's still alive in my eyes, anyways. It wasn't really until we started getting better technology, though, and that's really the key. You know, we started getting the satellite images that we now have on Google Earth. We all have accessibility to it now, which is really great. This is the same area. Yeah, this is the same area that this picture was taken. And you could actually still, like that, this Carolina Bay right here is that one right there.
Yeah.
Right? And it's actually better preserved now, which is good. They actually turned this area into a wildlife preserve. And cool. That's really allowed the vegetation to come back. And that's helped preserve a lot of these Carolina Bays. You could see them more in the old picture, because it was Dust Bowl times. It was dry. You know, there was a lot of exposed sand. Yeah. And so you can see them, but the vegetation has been allowed to come back, and that really helps preserve a lot of these. They're not being farmed or anything, so that's really helpful. A lot of the Carolina Bays have been destroyed because of agriculture.
Yes, that chemical erosion, I'm sure, is very destructive on these.
Yeah. Yep. So again, it was Michael Davies that came along, and he started researching these Carolina Bays. Now, we have to keep in mind that his hypothesis is like almost completely different. The only thing that he agrees on is that there was an impact into the Michigan area. Everything else is completely different than like Antonio Zamora's and most of my hypothesis. I agree with his timeline now, but a lot of his other stuff I'm not so sure about. But it doesn't matter. He came up with the use of this LIDAR, and he's made it publicly available. Everyone who's listening can go to centos.org and download his files. You need to have Google Earth Pro, and which is free, and it'll pull right up, and you have access literally for the entire continental United States, from California to the East Coast. You can have access to LIDAR. It is colorized. Like I said, he's kind of made a topo map with the colors, where every meter is a different color, and then it repeats every 10 meters, which is like an index contour on a topo map. So you can use that if you know how to read a topo map. You can use it to identify changes in elevation, you know, subtle changes in elevation. If you go to a mountainous area, this is a disaster. It's there's so many different colors, it's not worth using. But in these really flat locations, it's a great place to use them. River floodplains are really good places to use these. I can't tell you how many like Native American sites that I have discovered and found in some of these areas that are undocumented, because it's so flat, and you just, I mean, it's right there. There's a mound right there at a certain place, and it's like, okay, you know,
dude, mounds are interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So, so very useful tool is what I'm saying, and we've been using them to identify. And this picture right here, this location, you actually see them better in the old picture, because again, you're looking at the changes in the color, you know, from black and white pictures. It's actually harder to see them in the colorized photos because it's so flat in this area. This is really close to Myrtle Beach, by the way, but it's really hard to see them in that area. Where you really start to see them is places like this. This is it's still on a coastal plain. It's up between South Carolina and North Carolina. Tatum is actually this city that's right here. It's just a town, but you can see the highways that run through this area. All of these it's all farmland. There's houses there. There's a lot of area here. And if you really get good at training your eyes, you can start seeing like this. I could tell like this right here has an elliptical shape to it.
Yes.
Right? And like this one maybe down here is an easy one to see. Again, keeping in mind that most of them are low-lying anyways, and so they tend to be swampy. And that just gives them more, you know, better. Actually, they don't use them for agriculture as much because it's hard to drain them, and so they end up being left alone as swamps. But it's really the LIDAR. Once you click on that LIDAR, it really shows you how much of the terrain is just pot marked with these elliptical shapes all over. You know, again, if I'm just going to go back to show that difference again, but you can see how many are there, and then they just disappear when you go back, and you know, this is what we would have seen for hundreds of years, you know, or at least in the past 100 years, you know, flying in airplanes and stuff. You know, you would have seen these elliptical shapes, and it would have been impressive, but it's not until we had access to this technology of using LIDAR to see that they are everywhere in this location.
Oh, that's incredible.
And exactly, and they all have the same elliptical shapes. They all have the same orientation. That's key. And if you see, they all have like a raised rim, and that center is really flat, right? It's really flat all the way across. So, again, wind and water, I don't know how this could be a thing. But
I agree with you.
Definitely.
I've been thinking that the whole time, that just doesn't make any sense, and I feel like you'd see these a lot more all over, you know, if that was a natural process. Anyway.
Yeah, and you do. We'll talk about it in a minute because I've got that part of this presentation. I'm just going to kind of go through it quickly, but you know, we do find oriented lakes that are often brought up whenever a Carolina Bay discussion comes up, and they're like, well, there's oriented lakes in Alaska that look like this, and it's like, yeah, they may be oriented lakes and they're kind of neat, but they're not the same thing. Like these have, you know, they're mathematically elliptical. Those aren't, you know, these have raised rims. Those don't, and they're not the same thing. So making those comparisons,
those are significant differences.
They are, and so that's why I've turned those like pseudo Carolina Bays, and really it's the Carolina Bays that are the dominant feature. Like these should be the ones that all those other ones are being compared to. But they're not. So now again, I use that term Carolina Bay because most of them are found in North and South Carolina. This is a location over in Nebraska, and you can see coasts. Here's Nebraska though, way on like middle part of the country. And most of this is farmland. It's been farmland for a long time. You can see the highways right there. But when you click on the LIDAR, you see the whole landscape light up with the same elliptical shapes, mathematically ellipsed. We use that same program, using the least squares method to prove that these are elliptical. Most of them are. Obviously, like I said, there's going to be some that have subtle differences. There's going to be erosion that's taking place and things like that. But you know, to have a vast majority to have those same features is pretty incredible. And these all have orientation in the exact opposite direction. All the other ones were pointing to the northwest. These are pointing to the northeast. And when you look at it, the overall picture is when you start to see that there is a crossover and that they all kind of lead to the same point on the map. And that happens to be right over Michigan. You know, again, that mitten of Michigan. This is the bedrock geology of the mitten of Michigan, and that's that bullseye I was talking about, right? That was the bullseye that I was mentioning. Those different colors are different ages of sandstones.
Okay.
But that whole area of Michigan has been worn over by 7 or 8 glacial cycles, you know, and so it's really relatively flat. There's moraine, there's terminal moraine from the last glacial cycle where you have piles of like till and stuff from the glaciers. But this is an actual map of the bedrock itself, and the oldest layers are actually in the center, and these are the ones that are like Jurassic in age, which match a lot of the Tectite chemistry as well. But yeah, to me that's one of the most telling things, that there's something here. Now, if you ask a geologist in Michigan, they'll laugh at you and they'll say, "Oh, this is, you know, that the basin formed like this, that it actually formed bowl shapes, and that's why you see the basin like that." That actually goes against a lot of the geologic principles. I mentioned uniformitarianism already. That one I have a problem with, but the other ones are pretty sound, like the law of horizontality, that sediments lay flat. They lay in flat layers, like the Grand Canyon. You go to the Grand Canyon, you see all those flat layers going all the way across. There's a law of lateral continuity, which means at the Grand Canyon you see this as well, where if there's like a really white layer of sandstone and you see that other white layer all the way across the valley, it was part of the same layer at one time, and then it was eroded away. Those are all good, sound geologic principles. That one about the horizontal horizontality, that sediment layers lay flat and then they become stone, or then they become depressed. That's not being applied to this entire basin.
Right.
Where all of the Carolina Bays and Nebraska rainwater basins are pointed right to it, and they're like, that's where it happened, guys. Let's all focus on that spot right there.
Right.
And that hasn't happened. That hasn't even been considered. There was a study done a few years ago where they were doing gravitational anomaly data collection. Okay. And they found that area over Michigan has a gravitational anomaly that is very similar to the gravitational anomaly that we find at the Chicxulub crater. They're pretty much saying that it's pretty much on par with the impact that took out the dinosaurs. And I agree. I think if the amount of energy that would be needed to send huge chunks of glacial ice in all directions and to come down and form the Carolina Bays, and to form Tectites that landed on the whole opposite side of the planet, it would be a major deal. And I think the biggest difference is that there was ice to buffer this impact instead of it hitting it was still a huge deal. And I think we're going to find more and more evidence as more and more people kind of understand what happened here. Because again, the mid-Pleistocene transition is a thing that happened. But we're still trying to figure out what happened 13,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age. You know, we're still trying to figure that out. Nobody can agree on it. So good luck getting people to agree about something that happened nearly 800,000 years ago. But
sure.
Yeah. So anyways, so you've got all this data that kind of lines up, and it's basically, you know, I think there's enough of, it's circumstantial evidence, you know, it's hard to find direct evidence for any of this, right? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so old.
But there's enough of this like circumstantial things. There's so many, like how many coincidences do we need to line up to at least get geologists to reconsider their thoughts on it?
Well, and even in criminal investigation, all of this quote unquote anecdotal evidence is it forms itself into a pattern that then becomes you know, the evidence needed to support a corroborating theory, right?
Like the blood splatter,
this is the blood splatter. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't, just because it's anecdotal or whatever, like you're talking about, doesn't mean it isn't relevant. Like this is just what you're piecing, the patchwork of it, I guess is a way to put it. If this was a quilt of information,
right? Yep. So this is the this past summer I did speak at the Cosmic Summit, and I did speak with Antonio Zamora. Again, we don't agree on the timeline, you know, so it is kind of an interesting thing that two people who actually like really don't agree with each other can sit down and publish a paper, and but that's how strongly we agree that these things are too mathematically similar to each other. That they couldn't have been formed by gradual wind and water processes. It's just, and again, I'll use the term impossible, which those scientists hate, but it's impossible, right? You know, this could not happen. If it even happened one time, if you can get wind and water to reshape a pond that was already there, that would be a pretty incredible feat, right? Yeah. Not even talking about how that pond formed, which in this case, the guy in 1977, the guy that did it, he started with a sand table and literally started with a perfect circular shaped depression and filled it with water, which is basically a crater. I mean, I don't know how they got around that one.
I don't know. they were ready to get out of there, I guess. You know?
Yeah. And then this was the picture this is the drawing that he used in his PhD paper to prove that he made a Carolina Bay. And you could see, I mean, he didn't even take a picture of it, you know, but that's the drawing. It's not even close to being the same thing.
No, it's not. In no way, shape, or form.
Right. And this is literally what they use, again, to say that this were wind and water created. So, yeah, again, this is the process of us actually doing that. Conic sections, that's part of our hypothesis, is that, the conic section of something entering unconsolidated ground is what creates that elliptical shape. Now, it doesn't have to be something solid, and that's something that has kind of been brought to light over the past couple of months, is that these could have been formed as ice blew up in the atmosphere before they hit the ground. So it would have been the energy of the shock wave that creates the ellipse. And there's a guy that I've been talking with he's got a PhD in physics, and he does something with ballistics modeling, and he was showing us using computer models how these things can blow up in the atmosphere and create these elliptical shapes. And it's pretty convincing. I haven't gone through all of the science yet to kind of say that, that's how they all formed. But basically, like I was saying, though, the conic section, there's only 4 of them. You have a circle if something goes straight down. You've got a hyperbole. You've got a parabola. And then you've got the ellipse, right? And the ellipse is if it comes in at an angle, and you end up with that elliptical shape. And we're using that least squares method. You can see all the numbers. Those are all the coordinates of all these dots. You put that into the program that he created, and then it gives you, this graph over here that shows you how elliptical it is, and it gives you a percent error. This one has a percent error of 1.329%. I mean, that's how perfect it is. It's a percent error of like just over 1%. That's insane.
That's industrial. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So we did publish a paper. It's you can find it in the June edition of the Journal of Environmental and Earth Sciences. Again, that was a huge achievement for myself. It's hard. It's hard for me just to sit down and write.
Just good for you,
write about this, and we kind of helped each other out, as Antonio and I did, just keeping us going. The rejection of trying to publish a paper is heartbreaking, because you put so much time and effort into it. Yeah, and you send it to a paper, and then they don't even their rejection is, this is a great paper. It just doesn't meet our scope of this journal. It's like, what do you mean? It's Southeast Ecology or Southeast Geomorphology. How does this not fall into that? So that was tough. So trying to find a paper, but finding one, the Journal of Environmental and Earth Sciences, that's pretty good. And again, it went through the peer review process. We did have to make a few adjustments, and had to do some, we had to include a few things, but it didn't take away from our goal of the paper. And so that was, we were happy with it.
Great.
Yep. So that's out there now. We talked about the wind. Again, there's a big issue on whether or not this thing is Younger Dryas in age or mid-Pleistocene in age. This graph that I have here, this is showing us the ice core data. So we've been collecting a lot of ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica. Greenland only goes back so far, and then we can pick it up with the Antarctica ice cores. And they're able to take the ice cores and pull out oxygen isotopes from the cores, and they get temperature data from that. Okay. And so we have all of these ice ages recorded, all of these glaciation cycles recorded in these ice cores. And again, we have two timelines where we have evidence of impacts happening. Other impacts have happened in this time frame. For instance, the one in Arizona happened in this time frame. But that was a small impact, and that impact, affected that area. But again, we're finding evidence of wide-scale impact proxy from these two locations, the Younger Dryas and then the mid-Pleistocene transition. We talked about the two guys, and the evidence that they have and present on both sides. Again, I for a long time, I was totally on board with Antonio. I thought there was a lot of good evidence. I thought 786,000 years was just way too old. Which I'm sure a lot of people that are listening right now are like, that's so old, man. That's so long ago. But again, it was the shoreline data that really kind of pulled me back in to that.
I could see why.
This is the inverted stratigraphy that I was talking about. We found that it's been found in a couple papers. This one was a paper by Ted Bunch, who was one of the original Comet Research Group guys. And this was actually not even part of the paper. It was in their extra material section. But it was found that they did find an inversion of stratigraphy. And again, I do think that that's good data to look into. And I agree with Antonio that they should be doing more of this kind of work. But they're not touching it right now. So Davies and Harris, Tim Harris, he actually came to my house one time. He was in town, brought his son down to do something in Savannah, and he was just looking for somebody to talk about Carolina Bays. And I invited him over, and we ended up having a good long talk about these Carolina Bays and his timeline, which again, at that time, I didn't agree with him. But he did bring up a lot of good points that really kind of had me scratching my head. And it wasn't until the conversation that I had with Michael Davies about the coastal plain being pool table flat that made me kind of like, really, that was the gut punch. And then I was like, okay, now all that stuff that Tim Harris was telling me is making more sense, right? And the stuff about the Carolina Bays, and there was a huge benthic foraminiferal mass extinction that took place at that time too. Those are microscopic organisms that live in the bottom of the ocean. Okay. And there was a huge extinction event that took place at that time, mass extinction. And I think we're just now like at the tip of the iceberg of the evidence that we're going to find for mammal extinctions and things that took place at that time as well. Again, we're finding the DNA evidence of our own genetics that had like a 99% bottleneck that happened at that time, and then we see a diversion of genetics between us and the Neanderthals.
Right.
Which again, and that kind of makes it interesting too, because I mentioned earlier how the Younger Dryas was such a fun topic because it includes us. It's like we're direct, our direct ancestors were part of that story. Yeah. But technically so is this, this was, if we go way back, this was still our ancestors that were living through these times, and they survived. We're literally at the end of a long chain of survivors. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is. It is really. When you look at history this way, it really does bring like a whole nother like layer of wow, I can't believe we made it this far. And that's what it's also super frustrating when we see all the conflict around the world, and it's like, why are we doing this? We we literally live in one of the best times for humans to ever be alive, and we're just it's just
Carl
ridiculous.
Sagan's pale blue dot is what it's what it is.
Yeah.
Like, it's what that makes me think of. Yeah.
And then just looking at the deep history of our species and how much we did have to live through, and we don't give ourselves enough credit.
That's a great way to put it too. Actually, not giving ourselves enough credit.
Yeah. So, anyways, like I said, what ended up basically making me change my mind was the shoreline data and that conversation I had with Davies about the shorelines, and it actually was this. This was the image I pulled up. To prove him wrong that it's not pool table flat, and it's because I spent about 7 or 8 years every summer. I'd spend about 2 weeks on Sapelo Island, helping grad students do their PhD work. At their UGA has a marine institute there, right on Sapelo Island, and it's kind of it's the base. There's dorms there and all that kind of stuff, and we work one-on-one. It's a group of teachers that work one-on-one with these grad students, and we go deep into the marsh on like 110 degree temperatures. It's really actually pretty horrifying, but it's so gratifying at the end. We had you have a great time. You make these really close relationships with these guys, and they learn a lot from us too, which is interesting because I was always amazed at how many of these PhD graduate students were interested in getting into education as a career. And I was like, yeah. I was like, well, why don't you try something a little bit first? Because
sure,
it can be, you have some disappointing days.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's. So anyways, this is what I pulled up. This is actually coming from, the graph on the bottom was coming from a field trip guide from Valdosta State University, where I got my undergraduate from. And they would take students to Sapelo and then backtrack to look at the ancient Paleo-Atlantic shorelines, the ancient barrier islands. And they would stop. They had stops. Like stop 1 was way up here. But it was when I clicked on that LIDAR when I noticed where the Carolina Bays weren't. Right? You see all these red dots are Carolina Bays that Michael Davies has included in his survey. And they're only on the tallest parts of these barrier islands. Again, keeping in mind that they're barrier islands, so you have to know that they go up and then back down, right? So you have what would have been the beach. You have the main part of the island, and then it goes back into like an estuary, like a salt marsh. And so that's what you would have in these images here. And we only find those Carolina bays on the very tops of those ancient barrier islands. There's none below the beach line there, which was that was when I was like, okay, hold on, now I really could be wrong.
It was like nature did an experiment for you for a long time ago.
Yeah, right.
With a different hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course it backs up Michael Davies, which I don't agree with a lot of what he thinks, created the Carolina. He thinks that what happened was there was an impact, and it was a matrix of melted glacial water and sandstone that like washed over like a blanket, kind of covered everything, and that there were air bubbles that popped out of this matrix. And there's just too many. It's too complex for me. It goes against Occam's razor, and I'm just
I would say the more steps you add, the more difficult it becomes. Yeah.
Especially when we're looking at how precise a lot of these Carolina bays are.
Right. I agree.
Right. Like there would be different shaped bubbles popping and all kinds of stuff. So I have a hard time with that one. But this is the area in Myrtle Beach. Again, up in this area, this is part of that Heritage Bay Preserve, right? Yeah. And when we click on the LIDAR here, we see that there's a distinct location of where we find Carolina bays and where we don't. And all this area in red right here, which is under 6 meters, that's there. It's clear of Carolina bays. There's no Carolina bays there. There's a couple of them. If you actually know what you're looking for, you can actually see 3 of them that have been heavily eroded right here.
I see that.
And it's currently being eroded right now. So like that storm that just went by, it's eroding away at this Holocene age beach, which is the age that we live in now. And so that's happening right here. And there's a really sharp difference up to that last Pleistocene age beach, that one that was 125,000 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a really sharp, and that's why I like to use this one. The other one that I showed you from here, the other one I showed you from the other spot, it's a great distance. It goes like the beach is way over here, and it's super flat all the way until you get into like not quite 100 miles, but about 50 miles inland is where you start seeing elevation increases. But here in Myrtle Beach, you see a really sharp increase right at the beach, and so we have this barrier island here. This whole area would have been a barrier island for over 1 million years, and then it goes back down into another estuary, and then
pretty incredible.
A river floodplain. I also think that we see in this picture, we see some of that that difference between the Talbot, which was created 125,000 years ago. I'm sorry, that's the Pamlico, and then you have the Talbot Formation, which was 400,000 years ago, and it's 42 feet up above it. And you actually see these Carolina bays that are kind of like cut in half. They're truncated, where they've been, I think the ocean waters come up, erode away part of it, and then they went back down. And I kind of color coded it here in some of these pictures. There are better examples.
You can see the natural barrier, I guess. If that's the right word. You can see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see this is another area closer to Oak Island in North Carolina. Same thing though. Same thing where you see these bays up on the top of this ancient barrier island where they're really well formed. Like this one here is really nicely formed.
It is.
And it hasn't been exposed. This one not too far away from it though. Exactly. And it's a perfect ellipse. I mean, we can go in there, we can plot it and send it through the program, and it's like, yep, less than 1% or whatever. This one, though, you can tell is a little more eroded, and you can actually see where the water came from. There's like an inlet right here that broke the barrier, and there's an infill of ocean water. Really, the last time sea levels were when this was the beach right here.
Yeah.
It breached this Carolina Bay, and there's actually evidence of like salt marsh stuff in that Carolina Bay. Whereas this one up here probably doesn't have that. This one here was also cut in half. So
yeah.
So that's awesome. One location. Yep. Camp Lejeune, are you familiar? I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with Camp Lejeune.
For sure.
Yep. So here's Camp Lejeune in the bottom corner over here. The area of interest is actually this artillery range right here.
Yeah.
Which is really easily identifiable from the air. And when you click on the LIDAR here, you'll see that location is right in the middle of a truncated Carolina Bay. Like this area right here was literally cut in half by the sea levels. And you can actually see the transgression and regression happening where in this location where the beaches were, quicker in time, but they were kind of, as the sea levels were lowering, they kind of lowered in stages, and you can see that right there. So yeah, again, I think that these ancient barrier islands, and the fact that they're still here, lets me know that the Carolina Bays can still be here. Even if they're 800,000 years old, 788,000 years old, whatever. The fact that those shorelines are there and that they're dated to those times, they're made from the same material.
Right.
So there's no reason why the rim of a Carolina Bay could not last that long. And I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Now I did mention a couple areas where I didn't mention it, but I mentioned that anything below 30 feet, anything below that shoreline, they were lacking. There are a couple places, so I was a little misleading because there are some places where we find them. But these locations are areas that are subsiding. They're actually slowly sinking over time. And so this is the Delmarva Peninsula, and the parts of the Delmarva Peninsula, parts of New Jersey, are slowly sinking, getting lower. It could have to do with that isostatic adjustments that we talked about at the beginning, or it could just be the lack of sedimentation or whatever, and it's just slowly sinking into that area. But it is that data is recorded, and you can only see them on that central part. Keep in mind too that this is blue is sea level, and then it goes up 10 meters and then back down. So this blue is not the same as that blue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And so you do see a couple Carolina Bays like over here that are lower in elevation, but that's because that it was higher in the past, and then it has sunk in that location. So same thing with over here. This is actually lower, but this area has been sinking over time, and the longer you go back, the more time you allow for that sinking to take place. And so you go back 800,000 years, then you can have 30 feet sinking. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's part of that isostatic rebound that you were talking about.
It could be. That's what I mean. Okay. I don't know if that's been if that's part of that, or if it's just because technically the Carolinas are pretty far away from where the ice caps were still.
Sure.
So I don't know how much, most of the isostatic rebound that we see is happening where the ice caps were. So places around Canada are slowly rising. Places around the Great Lakes are slowly rising because of that rebound from the last glaciation, right?
Yes.
Keeping in mind that we've gone in and out of these things over the past million years or so. This area, Charleston, a lot of people are familiar with Charleston. It's actually rising. There was an earthquake there yesterday, not too far away from there. Right. They're usually not major earthquakes, but they do have earthquakes in and around Charleston. There was a major one, I think, around 1890. Could be off by a couple years there, but they have these earthquakes because there is tectonic activity. There is a elevation of land in this location. It's slowly uplifting. And you have adjustments, and we have earthquakes that take place when those adjustments need to happen. But you can also see that with the Carolina Bays, where you have areas that are above above 30 feet. And we don't find Carolina Bays, but they were lower in the past, and they've slowly been rising. So again, I think you can use this to kind of adjust the ages to an older time frame. I don't know how much you want to get into the wind and water stuff. I know that, like I said, I don't think that they match this. That's Christopher Moore there. We actually have a pretty good relationship, but he is very, very against the Carolina Bays being impact related, even though he's the chairman of the Comet Research Group.
I think you covered it well enough without having to go too deep into it for sure. This is the 1977 experiment. Again, he just used a fan to blow the stuff back and forth, and basically 180 every 15 minutes for 4 hours, and then he got this football shape, and they were like, okay, that's enough. You're good. Here's your PhD. Yeah. Exactly.
And he literally went off to became an oil geologist, which most of them do, and never even looked at a Carolina Bay for the rest of his life. So that was it. And then he left us all with this huge mess to deal with.
It almost seems like what's the easiest thing I could come up with to do this? I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Because everyone's going to agree with me. It's going to be no big deal.
Right.
Yep. This is actually the bay that Chris Moore did a study on. Chris Moore did a paper, or it was more like a poster presentation, and it was literally titled "Kazawarski was right." And it was a Carolina Bay story kind of a thing, and it's like, dude. But he was focusing on Herndon Bay, and so he was basically saying that this bay was formed by wind and water, and there's like evidence of multiple rims forming. He literally says that this bay migrated, that it was originally formed and had moved in the past at these different stages. And I was like, dude, if that is the case, then all of them have to be doing the same thing. So that just complicates it even more. That makes it even more difficult to understand.
No.
Because for whatever happened to form that Carolina Bay had to have been the exact same to happen to form this one or that one or that one. Yes.
It's like when you played with paint maybe as a kid and you have the same size, you're just clicking and you make the cursor bigger, like this exact same shape all over the place. They're just different sizes. Like there's no way. I don't know, man.
Exactly.
Like,
Yep. And I think the reason why this was like their most dominant explanation was because we do find Carolina Bays with water in them. This is actually the Cape Fear River Valley.
Yeah.
And so it's in a very old ancient river valley. And some of these do have water in them. And when you see them like this, you're like, oh yeah, that's a Carolina Bay. And then everybody's like, oh, they're oriented lakes. And so that becomes the most dominant explanation. Sure. But again, when you look at the overall picture in the LIDAR, it's like, no, they're everywhere, and those just happen to be some that do have water in them, right? And so that brings up that whole, the whole pseudo Carolina Bays, where they start bringing up all of these other oriented lakes that aren't Carolina Bays. They don't have the same properties as those Carolina Bays. I have a whole presentation for my second Cosmic Summit that's on this, so I'll just really quickly go through the pictures to show you the difference, but. Like these are the thermokarst lakes. They, obviously, just by looking at them, I can tell that they're not elliptical. Oriented lakes, yes, but they're literally like right next to the Arctic Circle, where the water and wind is coming from. And when you look at the LIDAR, you can see
it's
that there's
definitely not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah, they don't have those raised rims. They don't have the same orientation. They do have orientation, but it's right to the ocean is right there, right?
Yeah. Well, the other ones, because you keep using the phraseology of their like almost industrially perfect. That looks natural, right? The one you just showed me, and the others look quote unquote man-made, even though they are natural because of how precision. The precision with which they've retained their shape.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Like these are great examples of oriented lakes. The processes that they're explaining. That's a great example. Good job. Yes. You guys did well on that, right? But then relating them to Carolina Bays, like here's an Air Force Base, McEntire Air Force Base in South Carolina. By the way, I hope nobody's paying I do have a couple like military installations that I have LIDAR pictures for. I hope that doesn't become a problem.
Probably not. I don't think so.
I hope not.
It's all good.
Yeah. So anyways, here's McEntire Air Force Base. And again, when you click over to the LIDAR, you can see the whole place is just peppered. Now, some of these aren't that perfect elliptical shaped, but you can see that they're all perfect to each other. Like they were all formed by the same process, almost like cookie cutters in this location. And it's also a good place to point out that if you know how to read that color pattern, that this is a quickly changing terrain. Like it's a steeper grade. Yeah. And so if these were created by impacts, secondary impacts, that's what you would expect. You would expect some kind of settling in the downhill direction. And there's also some other, I didn't put them in this presentation, but there's some other, they're almost guitar pick shaped because of the elevation, the change in elevation. And that should be even more evidence to say that they were impact created and not, but I always get that, well, those aren't perfect ellipses. And it's like, well, they're perfect to each other. And, it's easier to explain them away by the elevation change than it is to say that wind and water could do that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, now you're just talking about gravity, right?
Yeah. I often get playa lakes. These form in like Texas and in Australia. These are almost always in river valleys, or in very flat areas that have periodic flooding, like sheet flooding. And so here's actually Amarillo, Texas, where they have a bunch of these playa lakes, and these are interesting. These are really kind of cool because they really pop when you look at the LIDAR. This is actually why Michael Davies changed the name to Ovoid Basin Survey. Because he started tracking these too, because they was like, well, these could be impact related, but they're not. These are pseudo Carolina Bays. These are formed by periodic flooding and then really arid conditions. So you go in and out of like really dry conditions and then a periodic flood and then really dry conditions. and over time they settle out, and you end up with these I don't even know what shape to call them. They're not elliptical, they're not circular, but they're they're ovoid, and that's why he changed the name to ovoid. Word. Yeah, here, another Air Force Base, Shaw Air Force Base, in South Carolina, and there's a really great, like right in the middle of the screen. There's a really great. See that.
Yep. There's another one kind of northwest of it. Yep.
Yeah. And this is like this one up here. This one's a really neat one because you can kind of see it. It cut right into that Piedmont change, like where the fall line is, and it just kind of punched right into that side, that edge of it. And there's a couple other ones up there too.
Yeah.
But definitely, these are Carolina bays. They could be. We can mark them. We can send them through the least squares method and prove that they're elliptical shapes. Kettle lakes. That's when a glacier leaves behind a chunk of itself and then it melts into one location. I don't know why these get brought up, but they get brought up as
that's not even close.
Examples. Not even close. And there's like one down here that's like, that could be close. But when you look at the landscape,
look at everything around it.
Yeah, it's like no. That's not what we got here. This is an area of Panola in South Carolina, and again, just a whole bunch of elliptical shaped Carolina bays. And so we could just keep doing this over and over again. The karst, I talked about karst because my original thought was like Grand Bay, the one that I first went to, was a sinkhole. There are sinkholes that are like really, like Kingsley Lake right there. Look how perfectly sound. They actually call that one Silver Dollar Lake. The airline pilots call it Silver Dollar Lake. Yeah, because it's like, and everybody like it's a destination. There used to be like there's a place called Strickland's. Which was a outdoor like water park where they had all these it was like uncontrolled fun. Like there wasn't anybody there to tell you to know. Yeah, and there was all these like high dives and like platforms, and you could really kill yourself and nobody would care. It was awesome.
Yeah. You're just part of the lore now.
Yeah. I tried to do like a 2.5 like dive and land around on my back. It was awesome.
Sick. Good job.
But like that's exciting. That gets people like like that's a neat. But if you had two of those side by side, that would be like incredible, right?
That's a pattern.
And even when you look at it under LIDAR, it's like okay, that's a sinkhole. These are all sinkholes, and not the same thing as these Carolina bays. These Carolina bays are kind of neat though. These are actually up on a ridge, which kind of gives that Pocosin, the swamp on a hill. That's kind of a neat way to look at it because we do see these Carolina bays only on that upper ridge. That's a flat terrain. It's a platform up there. And then all of this erosion has taken place around it. And I wouldn't be surprised if these are 800,000 years old, that this erosion started around the time that these were created because it created a weak spot in elevated terrain and caused it all to kind of start wearing away. So these are all, like I said, these were all just other examples. So
no doubt. Yeah. No, I appreciate you showing me all this. That's pretty wild.
This is Lake Waccamaw. This is the one that, like I said, I really wish wasn't like the model for Carolina Bays. It just confuses people. It's the largest one that's considered a Carolina Bay. But again, when you look at it under LIDAR, you can kind of say it's like, no, there's something else going on there. It's not what we saw with all those other examples. And we think that it was actually like multiple impacts there. But it's also in the Waccamaw River Valley, and so there could be flooding and things like that. And,
I can see that.
Yeah, we can get into that, but
anyway,
so that's pretty much the presentation there. This is probably like the kicker, though, is all those other ones were pseudo Carolina Bays, but you can go to the beach right now and kick water on the sand, and
look at them.
You can create scale invariant Carolina Bays that literally have every feature that a Carolina Bay has. It has the orientation, it has the raised sandy rims, and it has that elliptical shape. And you could do that over and over and over again. You don't need sand tables and fans and all that fancy stuff. Literally kicking water on the beach will give you scale invariant Carolina Bays, and it's such a simple process.
Right.
But we're still fighting.
The overlaps that you see here too, because you can see in how some of these the rims they touch, right, and I guess the more dominant one or whatever droplet hit the sand with the most force, eats up the other one. It's exactly what it looks like.
Right, and how can wind and water do that? It can't.
I don't see
it. Literally can't. It would destroy the rim of the other one. They would bleed into each other. You would have what we saw in Alaska, which is requires all kinds of other stuff too. It requires
you need the impact piece for that to happen. That rim to remain the way it is. Maintain its shape. Yeah, I agree with you. That's crazy. What are you? So are you going to return to the Cosmic Summit and keep going with this? Are there people that you kind of building your little army of people to drive this into it?
Well, I have to be invited, obviously. It is. I am an OG. Myself and Luke Caverns, we're both OG Cosmic Summiteers, I guess. I hope so. I don't know about doing another presentation. I've kind of said what I needed to say. Like the first year was I had so much to say. I pretty much gave this presentation that first year, and you only have an hour to do it. How long have we been on? We've been on for like 2.5 hours now. Almost 2.5 hours. And we were chit-chatting. Imagine like trying to put it all together and for an audience. That makes it a little more difficult. So I almost kind of wish I needed to break it up into pieces. and so last year I just went over the Pseudo Carolina Bay stuff. This year, like I said, I pretty much told Antonio Zamora, I invited him to speak with me with the intent that we had something more to show this year. And so we agreed that yes, we will come, but we want to have this paper published first. And like I said, we spent 8 months, and then it was really sweating bullets. The paper literally was in the June edition of the Environmental and Earth Sciences, and the Cosmic Summit was like June 15th or something like that. It was like literally like a few days before. So it worked out really good. Plus, the Danny Jones episode came out like literally the day I was driving up to the Cosmic Summit. That was a big boost in this topic. But
that's awesome. Man.
But as far as going back next year, I hope so. What I really would like to see next year is a panel. I'd like to see a panel of people. Almost, I don't like using the word debate style, because like even this year, like Antonio and I don't agree. We could have had a whole debate on timing, but we were like, that doesn't solve anything. Let's go ahead and we're going to focus on what we agree on. We'll talk about what we don't agree on, because it's not going to be solved by the time we walk off that stage. Yeah, let's be friends. And that's what we did.
Yeah, you can only get to. You're only helping each other by being friendly, right?
Right. So I would like to see more of like a panel style discussion, and so that people can ask these questions and we can work it out. Because I would love to hear the other side try to explain how like wind and water can create these things. Yeah. In that type of precision that we're showing them now, right? Yeah. So that's what I hope to see. Again, we have to have enough people to show up. We had a really large in-person audience, but the online audience wasn't as big as we hoped it would be. And so we're hoping that we're hoping really that we get some sponsorships or something this year to really kind of make it, because George really makes it. It's a big event. It's something that he puts a lot of time and energy into, and everyone who is there has a great time. But at some point, it has to be worth it for George to do it. And this was his third year, and he lost money, and so he was kind of like, oof. Yeah, so he's really, if he can get some sponsorships and we can keep doing it, it's really going to take a step up from everybody, really.
Dude, there's so many in the alternative media space now that have gotten really popular. Podcasts like Danny Jones's podcast. Joe Rogan has had conversations about this with several different people. It would be really cool to see the alternative media space step up and sponsor these sorts of things. Kind of what I'm getting at, because that's where this information is coming out of. Like these podcasts are sort of the conduit that is introducing it into the sphere where everybody else is getting that information. It's not the news, right? Like you're in the that one publication, but people are going to these podcasts, the online, like you're using your X account, which is great, right? And that's where you can build your body of work and people can go to. So it'd be really cool to see some of these alternative media moguls, I guess you could call them, the ones that have really blown up, help or
the host site, like we would love to see like Rumble host it, like Rumble have like a big sponsorship to say, let's produce a ton of material, and we'll present it to everybody,
Do you guys have contacts with people at Rumble?
I don't know. I don't.
I can help you.
I barely have an account with Rumble.
I can help you. For
sure. I have the. Yeah. So you have contacts. Yeah, that would be. I mean, like I said, if they can, if we can find a big sponsor, that would really help for sure.
Yeah.
But again, that's not me. I'm just lucky to go.
Yeah.
and I'm
cool.
super excited. So, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, what's other than this, like, future for you as far as the Carolina Bays and the study for this? Are there places around the world that maybe you could go to kind of support the domestic hypothesis, as it were?
I mean, I would like to be able to do more of that. You know, right now with my work schedule and things like that, I kind of that puts a limit on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of working on. Yeah, yeah. I'll wear T-shirts and hats and whatever they got. Right.
Go. Yeah. Right.
I do want to kind of get all of this story written. You know, the paper, going that route of doing a research paper, that was rough. That was. It was needed. It was worth it, and I'm glad we did it. But I can't see myself doing that, you know, year in and year out. That's just yeah. I have the information there. I'm really like, my whole goal of starting this was to get the universities to pay attention and to allow grad students to do their research topics on Lake Carolina Bays.
Yeah,
because right now, if a grad student goes into his advisor's office and says that they want to do that, they're like, "No, we already got this one figured out. You know, beat it."
Yeah, that kid with the fan proved this already. You know,
exactly. Right, yeah, that Ray Kalzaworski guy back in '77.
Right,
There's no need for you to do it.
Ray and his old oscillating fan. We proved it.
And the stuff that we are seeing from like university level papers, they're just regurgitating the Aeolian and lacustrine hypothesis, which is the wind and water stuff.
Right.
They're not doing anything new. They're not advancing the science at all, or even pointing out the inadequacies, which is what I've been trying to do here. So, you know, it's really going to take that. Like I said, it's not me. I really want to get back to fishing and hunting and things like that. I've been You know, my whole Dabbler experience has suffered because of Carolina Bays.
But hey, man, you know, hopefully this turns into something where, you know, you're putting your name on like a landmark evidence of an event that happened, and I hope you are able to get the support enough to separate this enough from the Younger Dryas impact theory. That way, it really is only supporting one another, because if you have one and then there's another, now you're saying, well, look, this happens over and over again. If you can establish a pattern of these impact events, then like that just helps both of your causes at the same time, right?
Yep.
So, dude, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think this is a really cool subject. And you said earlier, this is a shared history that we all have, and we're all the leftover, I guess, of everybody that was pushed through this and survived. You know,
we're all.
It's a testament to humanity. It really is. If you can survive this, like, I think you can get through your work day. You know what I mean? If you survived an impact theory, your great grandfather did, right? And no, I love learning about this, and this is the history that doesn't get the attention that it deserves, and it also sort of gives you more of an appreciation for our place in the cosmos, I think, because this is all the other planets around here, they don't have the same features that we have, and they don't now, you know, and just shows you how old we are and how old these other, you know, the other planets in our solar system are, you know, and so it almost has an all-encompassing historical reverence to it, to look at things like this and finally be able to understand. It really seems that LIDAR is becoming a huge tool for the alternative history space to use and support. So I appreciate your time, man, and what you're doing. I know that it's got to be hard. You know, you were talking about you have a family, I have a family, and finding time outside of that, and then your own personal desires, like it becomes to feel like a job in a way, you know, and I hope you're able to. This is probably a passion for you, you know, to dabble, and I hope you're able to dabble and continue to dabble and find more people.
Hopefully, I can use it as a springboard into more advanced dabbles in the future. Yep.
There you go. Yeah. Yep. Hats off to dabblers, man. No, absolutely.
That's right.
No, it was really nice. GNEISS. Nice to talk to you. There's a geologist joke. But dude, you rock, dude. Where can people find you?
The Dabbler's Den on YouTube. I'm the same on X. I do use my X account quite often. Those are the two most accessible places to find me. So yeah.
Sick.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Chris, thank you again for your time. You guys go over and give him a follow on X. That's where I found you. You post a lot of this stuff there, and you can just kind of go down your entire X wall of information you put out, and you repost a lot of interesting stuff as well. So please check out the sponsors in the show notes. If you found this content to be beneficial to you, please consider subscribing, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thank you, Chris.
All right, thank you.